Should be live now. Hopefully the sound is coming in. See here? Please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. And we should have a good stream tonight. It got started a bit later than I was expecting, but that is okay. Okay, so there's a few things that I did want to talk about today. This is the first stream that is on Sunday, first live stream on Sunday. They are going to be moving to this time, to this day probably going to be a little earlier in the day than today's time. So just keep that in mind and let me know in the chat what you think of the new day, what you think of the new time, if it works for you guys. We'll take it from there and make adjustments as necessary, but trying to make it as accessible as possible for everyone and also as, effective and convenient for me as possible. So I think that Sunday will allow for that. I just recognize that there are people in different time zones. A lot of people listen on the East Coast to this channel, and on the East Coast, if I don't start till 6 or 7 on a Wednesday, it's like 2 or 3 hours ahead for you guys, and I know that. And I know it's like 6 now, but they'll probably be starting around 3. I'm gonna try to get closer to that time next week. So, but we'll see how this goes. It's still earlier than normal, so that's good at least. I want to talk about a few things. I want to go over some models that I am going to be including in my paper and get that kind of outlined for you guys as far as what I've been working on. I'm not revealing the paper quite yet. If you want to see that in real time, week by week, join our Discord, and you can private message me on Instagram if you'd like to join. And we have weekly live calls on there every Sunday. Not Sunday, every Thursday, sorry. Today is Sunday. And that is where I kind of go over the paper a bit more. But I will discuss kind of one of the hurdles that I've had with this paper. And it's a fascinating revelation, I think, as far as what is difficult about writing a paper on a fundamental theory. Other than, assuming you've even properly enough defined what a fundamental theory even should be, or what it is, and you've got your models good enough, and your thesis essentially good enough. Assuming you have all that, what are some of the obstacles in just writing the paper itself? Not even, let alone proposing it and putting it out there, but writing it. And I ran into quite a hurdle with that. It took me months to figure out what it was, but I'm going to talk about what that was today a bit, because I think it's very interesting. It's very relevant to the subject matter itself. And what was so brilliant about the revelation was that it supported the work. And so one of the things that I realized, and we'll dive into this for now, but if you have anything that you want to cover, me to cover, or any questions that you want us to talk about specifically, I have some things that we can go over until then, but comment in the chat and I would love to take up your topics. But today, first I want to start with what is the issue with writing a paper on a theory of everything. And what it is that I have these series of models, and while they have to be made in order, they are describing a pattern that is still beyond relativity, which means it doesn't happen in a temporal space, essentially. The effects are observed in a temporal experience. I don't want to say temporal space, a temporal experience, but they don't actually take place in a temporal linear fashion. These patterns, because they are the pattern of mind, and the pattern of mind is ever present, they occur constantly in a simultaneous form. And when you're looking at it from a objective or super subjective perspective. And what that means is that it's very hard to write the paper starting from the beginning and then just going in chronological order as far as how you would read it to the conclusion. And so what I've started doing now is I wrote the intro, which was quite long, and I have had to probably redo a lot of it. I mean, I've already been redoing a lot of it, but I've also been working on the middle now and on the conclusion, essentially. And but the issue is that you can't write things simultaneously. And when God is thinking, he is thinking simultaneously. He is not thinking in a temporal fashion, and so that is where the true structure of mind happens. And so when you're trying to describe that pattern, you have to try and do it in a way that is natural. Okay, so you don't want to force something. You don't want to just write something for the sake of writing it, and you don't want to create models just for the sake of models. Like this, if this is going to be true, then it has to kind of be natural. And I've talked about this a lot with my models in the past. It was very important that my models emerged naturally. I did not force them into having any kind of attributes that I wanted them to have. They had to generate the attributes naturally that they naturally have, and hopefully they would align with other aspects of science that we currently see, which that happened quite well, I would say. But one of the things that kind of made me realize this is when I was looking at what is the final model of my work, which is called the cosmological verse, and that is this right here. This is kind of the culmination of the entire piece of work. And what's interesting about this is that each one of these it's the structure of the universe. And this is a universe, and this is, whoa, I don't want to move that. And this is a universe that is actually inside of the one previously, and it's just a chain that goes on forever. And each one below is actually within, but you can't model that in Excel because it's a two-dimensional format, so you're constrained. And you have to just deal with that by putting it below, which still works. But what's interesting is that with this structure, I've examined the symmetries within this structure, endlessly, and I continue to do so. And it blows me away every time I do it. But what's interesting is that when it has structure that starts at the top and ends at the bottom, but also it has a symmetrical structure, which is not this chronological structure that you see when you start at the top and you end at the bottom. What happens there is you get something that's chiral. So the very top, which would be right here, is not in alignment with the bottom, which would be like right here. And it's one off. Same thing with here, the very center of the side here. If you go all the way across, it's going to end up one offset of the center here. That is because the structure is spinning, and even though it's represented in a static model here, it's a model of a dynamic structure, and that spin means that no matter what, if you're traveling through it, you are not going to cut perfectly across it. Just like if a pool was a circle and you tried to swim from one side of the pool to the other perfectly down the center line, what would actually happen if you swam perfectly straight according to your perspective, is you would actually end up, if you were looking at it from above, like if you had a drone shot of a circular pool and somebody was swimming from one side to the next, and the water was spinning in that pool like a vortex, then what's going to happen is you're not going to end up at the perfect opposite side. And so that's what's happening here. But Eric Weinstein once asked a bunch of physics and math PhDs in a call that I was on, he wanted to see them to come up with a emergently chiral but fundamentally symmetrical structure that had 720 degrees of rotation and all these other aspects to it that he thinks are aspects of the universe, and I think most of them are. And what's funny is I had already made this structure, and it is exactly that structure. And but in order to find the symmetrical perspective of this, it was a little tough. But then I realized exactly how to do it. And how you do it is you start at the center out, which makes perfect sense. This is the center. The center of this structure is 4. It's not 1 when you look at it from the center out like this. It's a 4 dimensional manifold center, which makes perfect sense considering that the model actually starts from the 4 primary perspectives up here. And so this is really this. And this kind of just occurred naturally. It did occur naturally, where you have this 4-dimensional structure in the center. And so if you want a symmetrical structure, you have to go from the center out. So if you do that, then you get 2 symmetrical squares that you can get. So there's one. It's interesting. The count is 100. And if you do that on the other side, same exact thing. Count is 100. And so now you can see where the structure has symmetry. It's not if you cut it in half this way, but it's if you cut it in half kind of this away. And that's where the symmetry structure is if you cut it right down the center here. And you can just observe that by looking at, creating squares like that. And what's interesting is that, it led to all kinds of amazing, discoveries and alignments with the DNA double helix and such, which makes perfect sense when you understand kind of what causes that structure to emerge. And you get, 2 overlapping or entangled strings, essentially, or squares, really, if you're looking at this. But it just shows that in order to deal with simultaneity in a relativistic context, which I live in and I'm constrained by, you have to start from the center out. So I have to start at the center of the paper and then write it like that, instead of writing it from the beginning to the end. And now it's kind of writing itself much more so than it was. I felt the reason why this was taking so long to make progress with, is I actually did end up writing quite a bit, but I felt like even though what I was writing was accurate, it was arbitrary. It was like, why write this in the paper instead of anything else? And maybe we'll go over actually like part of what I had written already, and I'll just show it because it is changing. And I will do that actually. We can do that in a minute, but just to like explain kind of what was happening was that I was writing it in chronological order, and I'll share the intro at least that I had written. I won't share what I've written since, but I'm hoping to get that done very soon, now that it's actually moving again. But it really felt forced, and nothing about this work is supposed to feel forced. If it feels forced, I'm doing it wrong. It's kind of always been the assumption that I've had when it comes to just like writing the paper, making the models. And I did write a lot years ago when I first started this project, before it was even called sentient singularity theory, and I probably wrote, I don't even know, 15 pages, and it was very helpful to write that, but it was also just not. I've made so much progress in my ability to describe things, and when it comes to just like the language of this entire project, it has come quite a way since then. So, I mean, if you could imagine, I wasn't even using the word sentience in that. I don't think I used it once in that first initial draft, you could call it. 3 years ago. But I did just need to just write it. I just had so much that I just needed to get out, and it was very helpful to do so. But I didn't even use the word sentience yet because I wasn't even that far as the language of this project. I was using the word consciousness a lot, and I'm trying to avoid that because it's just so. It's got, what is it, when it's like a loaded term, I guess, and it's also got multiple meanings in and of itself, and then it's got even more tied to it when you start putting it in the context of other people, and what their first assumption is when you say that word, what pops into their mind, and so I've tried to avoid it. I don't think it's a specific enough term to be very useful. I think it's actually like distracting, but this new way of writing this paper allows for me to build on what I've already made naturally, which are these models, and instead of trying to describe kind of the models, it's more the models are like describing the paper in a way. They're framing it instead of they're framed within it. It's like they're what is framing the paper, and that makes it much easier because now there's something to build on that isn't necessarily arbitrary. And it's been a fascinating experience. This, like I've said in my Theories of Everything, the how-to guide video, which I highly suggest if you have not watched it. It's kind of an essential intro to this channel. This process is completely novel, and there's so many different considerations that you cannot understand until you are in that position, actually going through the motions, and you're doing so kind of correctly. I would, correctly enough, I would say, to actually encounter the constraints that are the true constraints of trying to describe something that is fundamental, and they are there. They're not something that occurs anywhere else, really, and they're not something that you can predict really before you get there. But what's interesting is that every time I encounter one of these constraints in my models, in the paper writing, in the way that I have to describe everything in this project, it makes perfect sense why I encounter them once I realize what the actual obstacle is. It's like this obstacle of why does everything that I'm writing now after the when I kind of restarted the paper last year, why does everything feel so forced? And I felt disingenuous presenting something that felt forced, and then I realized this like last month. It was like very recent realization, and it not only does it kind of help you write the paper in a natural way, that is kind of a necessary thing when it comes to this project. If your motivations are to transcribe something that's truly fundamental, not just to if you take your ego out of it, I would, as much as you can, I would say. I'm not going to say my ego is out of it, but I will say, like, it's a space that it's hard. You have to almost consciously try and take your ego out of it constantly because of just what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to do it, truly, you can't just force it. it just won't work. It won't be what you're trying to do. Maybe it will be something that gets adopted, but you write it and everybody loves it and it gets taught in a university. But if that's not what your goal is, if your goal is just to make sure that it's as accurate as possible, then you can't just force it. So that has been my kind of holdup, and it took probably almost a year to figure out what the holdup was. Probably 6 months to figure out what the holdup was, because it was very difficult, and that was quite the cool thing to realize, though. Even though it was like, well, dang, I wish I realized this, 6 months ago. But it's always cool when whatever it is that obstacle that you're hitting, and you realize what it is actually supportive of the work. And that's what is so fascinating about this is that it's such an entangled project that there is no way in which you can separate pretty much anything that is involved in it. It is related to everything, and because of that, and it's not just related; it's foundational. And so it's not just partially related; it is totally related to everything, and that is just such a weird thing to navigate, because it's constantly trying to like spin you backwards onto back onto the project again, but which is good, but it's also like you're trying to make forward progress as well. And I say this all the time, is that the mind is a structure of symmetries and also of directionality, and it's tough being in the finite experience that we are in and the relativistic space-time experience that we are in to navigate both of those aspects of a pattern that are equally there, while being in a space that is totally different, and you almost can't, and it's like you have to get out of that space, but then you have to somehow figure out a way to bring it back into that space. It's like it is very much like trying to model a three-dimensional structure two-dimensionally, or what that would require is taking multiple, looking at it from multiple perspectives. And so, for instance, when I was trying to get Midjourney to make this that cosmological verse model, this was the closest that I've gotten so far, and this is kind of a center out view. Interestingly enough, it created this. I didn't tell it to make this one and this one. I was kind of just hoping for something like this, and this is as close as it's gotten to modeling, giving me like a 3D image of the two-dimensional Excel model that I have, but also it's still two-dimensional here. So it's very odd, like how you have to deal with that. But then it's still, if we're going to look at it completely, even if you're looking at it in a three-dimensional sense, which this is kind of trying to show a three-dimensional image in a two-dimensional format, so is this. You'd have to look at it from this perspective and from this perspective, from the center out, kind of an objective or super subjective perspective, a simultaneous perspective, and also a kind of a relativistic directional perspective, I guess you could say, which would be here. It's not even relativistic, it's like directional. And so even then, you're going to need both sides of the coin, and you can't look at both sides of the coin at the same time. Even with a coin, you can't do that. Try it. You can't. You look at the center, you'll see nothing. You have to look at heads, and then to look at the other side and look at the tails. But they're both there at the same time. You just can't see them at the same time, and that's just due to the constraints of focus when it comes to our mind, our constraints. But God is not like that. At least I don't believe that God is like that. He definitely sees things beyond time. So that is kind of a simultaneous perspective. But simultaneous isn't, even in the supersubjective sense or the objective sense. I'm not sure exactly which is the best way to put that. I think supersubjective is more accurate, actually. It means like God's perspective, like a God's eye view. It's subjective to him. It's his subjective perspective, but to us, you could call it an objective perspective. But then it has the word object in it. We're not talking about objects. We're talking about beings, not things. So I think that it's better to use super subjective. But comment in the chat what you think, objective perspective or super subjective perspective. But for God's eye, to describe a God's eye view. But this is even in that sense, that super subjective perspective, when you're dealing in simultaneity, to still allow for causality means that you have to you have to think about causality in kind of a reciprocal sense, in a way, almost. It's or like it's, I don't even have the words for it. It's like God knows the ending of the book when he and the beginning at the same time, and so therefore he knows the center of it. And it's, even though we experience the book as since we're in it, we're the characters and we experience it chronologically, in a way. We're like kind of also the reader, but we're not the writer. And the writer of a book ideally would know the ending before they even started writing the beginning. And that is that there is a space, there is a way of looking at this that allows for causality in simultaneity, but that simultaneity almost gets rid of the concept of causality, because causality is cause and then effect, which is it kind of flies in the face of what we think of as simultaneity. But when I say simultaneity, I don't mean just everything happens at once that will ever happen. It means that everything that is happening at once, which is not the same thing as anything that will ever happen has already happened. That is not true. What it is that everything that is happening at once, which, if you say that, it's like, well, yeah, obviously. I mean, that statement it's like perfectly consistent and makes sense. But that, even though that it is perfectly consistent and makes sense when you say that, which implies that that's correct, obviously, it also is tough to conceptualize of that, because we don't experience everything at once that is taking place like God. God experiences, he knows everything that's happening. And we don't. We know what is happening, around us for the most part, but our viewpoint is very limited, whereas God is experiencing everything that is happening, and he also knows the ending of the story that he's writing, not necessarily for us, but for creation. He knows the end of the story of creation, which is the end of a cosmological verse. He knows he has a plan for this universe, and it will be done. And so he does know the ending, just like an author knows the ending. But that's kind of the other side of the coin. But the part that I'm talking about is just knowing everything that's happening and acting in a manner that is simultaneously, that to us appears as simultaneous in a way. It's like God is acting over here in this person's life and over here in this person's life at the same time. But because God's looking at it from a God's eye view down, it's not to him violating the rule of focus. Maybe that's something that we have to kind of have on outlined in this work a bit more as like these specific rules that are constraining of mind. One of them is focus. The mind is requires focus. It's built into the structure itself, and there's like, we're gonna get more into it, but there's even Kanye West lines that are very funny about this. And it's like, I'll just say this because it's funny, and even though I don't know how appropriate it is, but whatever. There's this line in a Kanye West song. It's like he's like talking about like women's breasts, and like he's like, he says he loves them because they prove that he can focus on two things at once. And that line like always stuck with me as just, for one, being very funny, and also being kind of like very oddly deep, even though it's also extremely, it appears to be extremely shallow. There's like implications about that are like oddly very deep. And so what is focus is kind of it's very specific. You can focus on a picture, and you can also focus on a specific, pixel in a picture, in a digital picture, or a specific brushstroke in a painting, or you can focus on the painting all at once and take it in. God is looking at the cosmos as a single painting, and with practically infinite arms, he can paint this painting all at once. And we are one of the little we are like a brush, and that's it. So we can't see the whole big picture very easily, and it almost has to be shown to you in some ways, but you do have to have the right perspective in order to kind of meet that, so that you know what you're even looking at, which means you have to kind of also deduce it. And it's a cooperative cooperative action. Everything in the universe is a cooperative action, but it's just there's also a hierarchy to it. So it's not just God and whatever he does is what is, and that's, even though that's true, we also have sovereignty and which he allows for us to have, and us doing things is a co-creation of reality. It's not we are when people say we are the creators of the sole creators of our own reality, I really dislike this mentality, even though I do recognize that it is often useful to achieving goals for a lot of the people that adopt it. 1 minute. But that I would say that it's even more useful to think about things as a co-creative relationship in which there is a hierarchy, because then you can align yourself with the goals of the being that's higher than you in a hierarchy. And if you do that, then you're much more likely to get what it is that you're expecting, and or that you are that you've aligned yourself with. I don't want to say that you want, but because it might take some work to align yourself with that being, because it is a sovereign being. God is separate from you in a way, and also because of our limited perspective, we don't know what is best for us. That's very hard for everybody, myself included. I struggle with it as much as anyone, and where you think something is right, it should be done a certain way, but the reality is that God knows that that's not necessarily the best way for it to be done. And also sometimes your actions impact whether or not that's the best way for it to be done. Sometimes your actions change how things best can be done. This project is like one of those. I mean, every project I've ever had is every project anybody's ever had, for the most part, is it deviates from what our like desired plan is, and not always to a heavy degree, but sometimes to a very severe degree. But even if it's slight, like there's nothing will ever go exactly how we want. the best is when it doesn't go how you originally planned, but it goes much better. But and that's usually the way that it actually will go. It's just sometimes takes enough time to realize that that's what happened, or it might not even be the case that you ever realize that is what happened until we're no longer, until after you die, essentially, and you can see God can actually show you the big picture, which I think does happen. So, sorry so late. Don't apologize, Every Explorer. Sorry, I'm so late. Why do you think there is such gender confusion in the recent past? We'll talk about that in a minute, because that's actually a good topic to talk about. If I'm not mistaken, Chaim described a similar structure from which was, according to him, necessary sufficient for consciousness to emerge from and be able to persist independent of. I'm going to have to look into that, because a consciousness... Yeah, I mean, I have to look into that to see what you mean by that. Is God... But we can maybe look into that on the stream. Is God the 0, the 1, or the -1? God is one and infinite oneness. He is he is everyone, and he is one, but fundamentally he's one. That is like the primary perspective of to them, is the truest, most fundamental view of God, is that he is one. But it is true also that everything is within God, and everyone is within God. Everyone has a piece of God in them, but that isn't like I said, there is a simultaneity to the truth, but then there is also a directionality, and this is why I don't disagree with people when they say you are God. It's inevitable that you are God. You must be God. That's true, but that's not actually the most helpful way to look at it, I don't think, because it doesn't contextualize anything for you. Actually, it doesn't contextualize others either, when it which is necessary for you to even perceive meaning, the reality of meaning. You must see things in a contextual relationship that is hierarchical, and so that's why it's like meaning comes from not you are God, but it comes from focusing on that. Meaning is visible from the perspective of you are sovereign from God, and that is an intentional decision by him to create someone sovereign from him that can make choices that are our own choices, and because that gives him meaning, that gives us meaning, that gives others meaning, the more you think about it. And so God is one, but we'll talk more about it. If God, the meaning, even if this structure was destroyed, the consciousness once emerged, it can still exist. Yes, that's true. Consciousness Chris Langan said this in his interview with Michael Knowles. He was asked about the afterlife, and he said, "You will persist," and that is true. If you are deleted, which God, I believe he can do, he can delete you, and if he chooses to, then either he chose to because you really pissed him off, and therefore we kind of have to accept that if that happens, like, it was deserved probably, or you deleted yourself. Essentially, when people say like you sold your soul, it's like you can eliminate your own sovereignty so many times and lie internally and externally so many times that you destroy the coherence of your own self, and that that means that once you're no longer in this space, you're kind of being held together by everyone else's awareness of you at that point. And but as soon as nobody else is aware of you because you're no longer here, then you kind of disappear. It's like a corrupted file. If you're writing a paper or whatever, and you have some file on your computer and it gets corrupted, you're not going to keep it around because there's nothing to the file anymore. So you just delete it. But Yeah, that's not the main. That's not. I don't think that's the norm. The norm is that you will persist. That's the point. If God had willed, they would have all believed, but he wants to fulfill this world, that I will surely fill hell with them. There is no free will according to any scripture. Free will is, it's no, I don't even like the term, but anymore, because we've just harmed, it's just so loaded, and people think it means different things. If you listen to Sam Harris or somebody talk about free will, they're like, what they're describing as free will is not what is free will. Like, of course, what Sam Harris is describing when he's talking about free will, that doesn't. He's right. What he thinks free will is does not exist. So it's not even right to argue with him, does free will exist or not? It's like, does your definition of free will exist, or does mine? And that would be a better discussion to have with him. It would actually go somewhere. It's impossible for that discussion to go anywhere if you have two different definitions of free will. But choice does exist. It's only in specific instances. Not every decision that you think you make is a choice. Today, I went with my wife, and we picked up breakfast at a place near us, and we ordered what we wanted. That was not a free will choice. At a certain point, I decided to stop eating bacon and pork in my life, even though I loved, ham and bacon and, pork in general. That was a free will choice because it was against my nature, but it was against the instincts that I had. But if I'm just ordering what I want and there's I'm not putting any constraints on myself other than just what is it that I want to eat, then that's not a choice, really. It's just, even where you picked to go eat isn't a choice unless it was made with considerations in mind that are beyond just your cravings and convenience. If it was made with the will of another in mind, or maybe even health, like that would be instances in which choice is actually occurring. So that's the minority of quote-unquote decisions that you make every day. Most of the quote-unquote decisions that we make every day are not decisions. Or if they are, then a decision is not the same thing as a free will choice. A free will choice is it's a sovereign choice. It's a choice that is recognizing of and accounting for your own sovereignty, and also the sovereignty of essentially a higher perspective than your own, which would be like God. So it's free will is implied in the Bible if it's defined like that. In countless instances everywhere, but they don't talk about it. But it's built into everything. But just like the idea that you can choose anything at any moment, that's not free will. When Sam Harris says things like that, that's not in the Bible at all. But the mere act of creation itself is a meaningless act if it's not creating of and impacting of other sovereign sentient beings. So like the entire story is about the generation of meaning, and that only can happen in relationships between multiplicity of sovereign sentient beings that have sovereignty, which means like they can make choices independent of each other. If all of us, if we had no capacity to do evil, or if we only operated on instincts, then there would be no point to creating us. It's like making a robot. If you build a robot, does charging the robot give your life meaning? Like, or do you feel like, oh, I really took care of someone else, like I mean something to someone? No, because the robot is not someone. And if we had no sovereignty to our choice-making abilities in certain key moments in which our awareness is there, then there would be no point to even making us. It would be useless. It'd be like making robots for no one. Just like it's like I don't know, be like God playing with toys and by himself, and that's it. That's pretty boring and terrible. Okay. Only a forgetting that we are the one manifested through the negative one. But the active principle has to be manifest, though zero is both and has the choice to manifest. So only zero has freedom, in my opinion. Interesting. I think that I don't know what... I see what you're saying there to some, and I think that you're onto something. I don't know if I would have... I don't know why you think zero is why you're using zero, but other than that, I get it. I think I would recommend this video, especially the stuff models being limited, only metaphysically capturing the totality of things. Tom Campbell and Dr. Ian McGilchrist, a discussion of the nature of reality. I might have seen part of that, and even if I have, I should watch it again. Tom Campbell is somebody who I'm hoping to have on this channel later. On maybe this year. I get the Reuben sandwich or the calamari every time. It's funny. Does sentient singularity theory have anything to say about the idea of so-called life plan or the kind of near-death experiences frequently talked about? And if so, in what context? Your free will and tastes and acknowledge institutional access and experiences aren't chosen by you, so how can you have any sovereignty in your choosing? I'm just going through all the questions real quick, and then we'll hit on all of them, including the gender question at the beginning. We'll hit on that one in a minute. Manifesting is the point, and forgetting the basis of our existence is the only way to create something else. I mean, okay, your free will and tastes and knowledge and institutional access and experiences aren't chosen by you. So how can you have any sovereignty in your choosing? I created the light and I formed the darkness. Okay, so those things are not chosen for you for the most part. They're not. That's true. But that's not what I'm talking about. At a certain point, I decided that I wanted to make changes in how I live my life and what direction I'm trying to head towards, even though my instincts are still exactly the same. So yeah, now I have an awareness of what I think is good for me to do and what I think is not good for me to do, and I now have a choice in certain instances in which I come across those, and also in a grand direction scheme of things, kind of direction overall. To have a viewpoint of which direction I'm going to head down, and because you do stumble along the way, and that you do have at certain moments, but here's the point to kind of address what you're saying. If someone is unaware of enough of what they need to be aware of in order to perceive what is good and what is not in that in a specific instance, if they don't have enough awareness to understand what is good and what is not on a specific topic, then they are blameless for their decision, because it's not a decision. Like you said, there's no free will in that instance. So you're right in that circumstance. I had a very different perspective on dating and marriage and sex and even food. In certain foods, before 5 years ago, and I had different goals with those things, and I wasn't making a choice in that instance. But now that I'm aware of a greater context of those things, now I have a choice. I can continue to just follow my instincts, or I can try and submit my will to to the will of God, that is free will. I'm choosing to submit my will to the will of God, or I'm trying to submit my will to the will of God. Like that's choice. But if you don't even see the will of God in that moment, or if you only see the will of God and you don't see, but that's pretty rare for us, you don't see any kind of instinctual contrast between us and God, or what we would want to do and what God would want us to do, then yeah, you don't have any free will in that instance, and there's no blame in those instances. If somebody truly thinks that there is no such thing as good and evil, they're likely to do some things that are objectively or super subjectively evil, but they're also, God does know that they have no idea what they're doing. Like, they're almost not doing it. It's like they are at that point almost a robot. If you're operating purely on instincts, you are operating robotically. And so, this is why it's so important to just have grace for people wherever they're at, and that kind of requires meeting them where they're at. You can't judge them according to your understanding, even though you should judge actions always. Your actions, the actions of others, whatever. You should judge actions according to where you're at, but in your understanding of what is good and what is I hesitate to say good and evil or good and not good, because you could say good and evil. Yeah, that's fine. It's not that I don't think that which is evil exists. It's just that I think that it's very rare that people actually, like, I think what most people think, I'm trying to look at it from God's perspective. If somebody doesn't believe that God exists and doesn't believe in a morality higher than them, really, or doesn't see it, then they are not necessarily evil, even if their actions are evil. Like, you could say those actions are evil, like, but that they are not. They just don't know what they're doing. They're just a robot. So, but. Yeah, not everything is like I said, free will choices are very few, and they might happen multiple times a day, probably do, but like 2 to 3 times a day, something like that. And that's if you're pretty sovereign or pretty aware. I would say it's not your usual state is to be making free sovereign choices constantly. That's not how we operate. But yeah, let's get into the gender question, because it was the first question. But maybe we'll come back to that, and also we will get to the others. What's up, Ethan? Today I've given you 2 paths, one of death and one of life. God gives you the choice, knowing certain people will choose death. God knows to manifest both. Manifestation itself is good to God. God gives us, there's 2 paths always. We'll come back to that, but I'll talk about gender, because I was talking about this on our Discord the other night. It's something that I don't talk about enough on here yet, and I will start to eventually, but there's just a plan for how to approach things on here, on this channel, but we're going to get into personal morals and politics and stuff a lot more, but gender is a very charged thing right now, and I think that part of the reason why there's so much gender confusion is because we have no basis in our understanding of reality that in a scientific or institutional sense, an academic sense, that is actually based on fundamental reality. So it's not based on any foundations, and this leads to issues where people who might have it right don't have it right because they actually are building it from that perspective, from a foundation that is consistent with what other people are using to build their perspective from. So if somebody says certain things about gender based on the Bible, but then somebody else doesn't believe in Scripture as being divine, then and they're using our academic institutions and our scientific, narratives to build on, then you don't have consistency between the two of you anyway. So good luck with that, debate. It's not going to work. But also, both of these, I would say, but especially the one with, and I think Scripture is solid. It's almost like a cheat code. It's like, it will point you in the right direction. But the thing is that if you're kind of just going through the motions because it was what you were raised with, and you didn't actually come to the conclusion yourself that Scripture is wise beyond you and divinely inspired, then you're not. It's not built on solid foundations for you either. Whatever statement you're making, it's just adopted dogma. And but same thing with the scientific narratives, except the scientific narratives are based on us trying to understand the world, and we're starting from a non-foundational starting place, which means that you cannot actually get to anywhere with a lot of internal consistency. And that's what's happening with gender right now. But also there's a metaphysical process that's happening with gender. And, a rabbi that I listened to sometimes said this a while back, and he was talking about just like the process of the cosmos and the goal of God, and how we're going to give birth to the Messianic era and a new creation, and that he said, if you're going to, and even Eric Weinstein says something like this, and he's not using it the same way, but the wording, the language is interesting. He'll say like, Earth is not our home, it is our womb. I disagree with this, that it's not the idea that it's not necessarily our home. I think it is our home, and it also is a womb. It's just not, I don't think it's necessarily our womb, but it is a womb. And if you're going to be a womb to give birth to some new creation within, and sentient singularity theory is about a cosmological verse, this structure right here, is going to create another one within it. So you end right here, and then another one of these is generated within it. But you can't model that here, so I modeled it below. But and then another one will be within that one, and within that one, and within that one. It's like those Matryoshka dolls. And it's also like people. Like, think about like human reproduction and reproduction of any being that we know, really. It like occurs within, but especially a multicellular organism. Like a human. A human comes from within another human. A universe comes from within another universe, or a verse comes from another verse. This means that we have. He said, you kind of have to become more feminine in order to like adopt feminine traits and become the womb, and that makes sense. In order to unite, also, or become one, we have to kind of become super entangled, and that's a feminine trait. So there's metaphysical process happening here, and it's not saying that it's manifesting well in mainstream culture. I don't think it is, but it is resulting from kind of where we're headed in part. But it's also the way in which it's manifesting, which is in confusion, is because it's not founded on fundamental reality. So here's the reality. Here, when we're going to talk about gender, this is the issue is that you have one side that says that gender is the same thing as sex in humans. And then you have the other side that says that gender is different from sex. And the reality is that both of these are true. In what it is that gender occurs on every single scale of the periodicity of sentience. It occurs everywhere. If we look at the standard model of elementary particles, let me pull it up. The standard model is a gendered model, okay? If you look at it, and you look right here, you can see that, let me find a simple one. You have the quarks and you have the leptons, okay? This is gendered, quarks and leptons. If you look into the leptons itself, it is also gendered. Electrons, muons, and taus are masculine. They are active. They are charged. Then you have electron, neutrino, muon, neutrino, and tau neutrino. This is neutral. It is not charged. It is feminine. It is charge dependent is really a better way of putting it. It's not that it's not charged. It's charge dependent. And same thing when you look here and you look at the quarks. There is gender. Up and charm and top, these are masculine. Or truth. Sometimes people use the word truth for the top quark as well. I like that better. Or down, strange, and bottom, or beauty quark, which is another term for this quark. This is the feminine, okay? And you can see this transcend even above this with the nucleons of an atom, or the hadrons. The proton is 2 up quarks and a down quark, and the neutron is 2 down quarks and an up quark. It's the gender. It continues onto the next level of periodicity, essentially, and a neutron is neutral. It is feminine. It is a female, essentially, on the hadronic scale. That is what it is. I mean, and a proton is male on the hadronic scale. And the merging of them together into an atom, into the the nucleus of an atom, which is really what an atom is, essentially, is a marriage structure. It mirrors the marriage structures that we see naturally in humans. When you look at isotopic patterns in the elements, you will see they follow patterns that you also see in human marriages, where sometimes there's more it's usually one man and one woman, one proton for one neutron, but sometimes there's more neutrons than protons, but there's, for the most part, no marriage structures or stable unions between multiple protons and for one neutron, more protons than neutrons. You see that with marriages too. In cultures throughout history, polygamy doesn't mean multiple husbands and for one wife. It means like multiple wives for one husband, because that is a stable structure. But multiple husbands for one wife, not a stable structure. It's not a necessary structure either. There's no reason for it, and it also is not stable. So even if people try and create that, why does that not happen in any culture? But in every culture, for the most part, at some point there has been polygamy. But for the most part, we all end up kind of admitting and moving towards the idea that the ideal is one man, one woman. Same thing with this, stable elements is usually one proton and one neutron. But there are stable isotopes in which there's multiple neutrons for one proton, and we'll get into that more as I explore it more. And I have been. I'm trying to understand the beginning of that level of process, and the beginning process of that level a bit more. But we'll save that for another stream. But the point is, gender is everywhere. Look at politics. We have the right and the left. What is that really? Like, it's the masculine and the feminine. It is the side that is focused on others, or it appeals to the focus on of others. Democracy. It's inclusive. It's about it's about multiplicity. It's not about singularity. It's not about sovereignty. It's about kind of unity and being kind of entangled, which is very feminine. Like, this is a feminine perspective versus individual sovereignty, kind of focus of right, of of the focuses of right-leaning politics. There's gender there too. It's not objective or super subjectively true in its existence in the way that, or it's not fundamental in the way that it is on like an atomic scale or a human scale. When it occurs in the periodicity of sentience that is outlined in sentient singularity theory, which is, you know, a periodicity of nested holonic mental structures or minds, like a proton and an atom, and then you know, a molecule and cell, and then a multicellular organism, and then eventually a verse itself. That there is gender there. Gender is an inevitability but that is obvious in a hierarchical structure too. This is what people don't understand, is that we have eliminated in our narratives politically the idea of a hierarchy between the genders. We'll say the genders are equal and they're you know, in every way. And the issue with this is it eliminates the need for each other, because now there's no specific roles or strengths or even I don't want to say weaknesses, but limits. Limits is a better way of putting that. And if we have each of us have no limits and no constraints and no hierarchy, then you will eliminate the gendered structure, because the gendered structure is a structure of difference and complementarianism in the right context. Like the marriage structure is a complementary structure, but it is also fundamentally a structure of difference and a structure of hierarchy. Like right now we're denying the idea that there's a hierarchy to gender, and there is a hierarchy to gender, and you can't get rid of it either. If you try to, it's still going to be there, but nobody's going to take any responsibility anymore and be like, okay, you are the leader, so therefore, because you're the leader, you have these responsibilities. And like, okay, no, if I'm not the leader, then I don't have responsibilities anymore, and not the same ones at least. And so therefore, but if you can't escape being the leader because it's part of fundamental reality, which it is, then you're going to just lead. You're still leading, but you're leading them astray. So, you know, when I was first trying to figure out gender on the atomic scale, I thought, okay, proton is male, and that means a negative, if that's positive force, so the negative force would be female, right? So like that would be the electron. But it didn't work. It was forced, because I realized there wasn't any symmetry there. There wasn't a unified structure there that mirrored the marriage structures that we see on the scale that we're at. And also, it just doesn't make sense that a female is a negative structure. It's not a negative structure. It's a charge-dependent structure, aka a neutral force. Or a structure with neutral energy, and that means it's charge-dependent, which means it is subject to the charge of that it is around, which makes it the subject. It makes it not the leader. So it's either going to be led by a proton that binds to it, or it's going to adopt the negative charge of you know, or that it is around, which in human context would be like hedonism. And it's the sexual energy without responsibility. That's what hedonism is. And it's it is the energy of creation without any responsibility, and that guides it. So, and that is what we see, you know. And it made perfect sense when I was like, okay, actually, no, the neutron is the female, not the electron. Now that made sense, because it's a composite structure, just like a proton, meaning it's composed of parts, those parts form a structure that is it's a binary triality. It's two up quarks and one down quark, or two down quarks and one up quark, which means that it's two types of quarks, but there's three of them, so that there's what this causes is it causes a structure that allows for symmetry to contextualize, you know, it's like dark and like black and white, or up and down. It like allows for differentiation to occur, but also there's a weightedness to it because it's not one quark. They're not made of one up quark and one down quark, where there's no directionality or charge or weightedness. It's the same thing as if you are looking you're walking down a path and you get to the path forks into two. If you have no idea where one of them leads, and they both seem to lead into the same basic direction, like they both lead into just an endless flat plane, and there doesn't, you have no idea where north is or anything like that, and you don't know where each path will lead. There is no choice anymore, between those two paths. But if one of them looks like it's headed towards the mountains, and you need to get to the mountains, and the other one looks like it's headed toward the plains, now there's a weightedness between these two choices, even though there's still two choices. Same thing occurs with if you have a compass and you know that you need to head north, if one of the paths seems to head north and the other one seems to head south, then now there's a weightedness and you can choose one of the paths over the other. People will say all the time, but what if there's, how do you know it's always a binary path? It's not and this is the same thing with gender. Gender is a binary path. It must be a binary path. It's built into the fundamentalities of reality. And it's like, well, what if their path comes to 3? It's like, no, you actually, in your decision-making process, you don't make the decision between the 3. You make the decision by narrowing down to 2. So be like, well, not that one because this, and then therefore now between these two, that. And this is true of every decision that we make because it is a fundamental structure built into information processing, and we are inside a mind. So, God is a mind. So his creation, and he wants to create other minds because that's how meaning is generated. And fundamentally, it's also all you can truly create. That's all that can really fundamentally exist. So if you want to truly create, then you have to create something that can only that does fundamentally exist, not just exist kind of subjectively. It's that means that like we cannot escape these constraints and of mind, and that those constraints are what cause gender to emerge. And we're very, very confused because of our scientific narrative is wrong, our political narrative is misguided, and even if it's not entirely false, when people say gender is a social construct, it is a social construct, but it's not that doesn't mean that it's avoidable or changeable. It's not avoidable or changeable. Gender when I say a social construct, I don't mean it how they mean it, which is that what they mean is it's just something that we made and we can change it because it's something that we made. No. What I mean is it's dependent. It emerges from the relationships of multiplicity, but that does not mean that you can avoid it or change it. It is built into the fundamental constraints of reality, that there is a gender binary, and that gender binary has certain implications on what masculinity is, what femininity is, but then when you see things on the on the other side of this, when you have people arguing against it, where they're just like saying, you have more the right-leaning perspective, I guess you could say, in political narratives right now, which I actually agree with their conclusion, which is that we should embrace, the realities of gender, and because they're wonderful, they give our lives so much meaning, and they make all of us more meaningful. There's no one that it degrades. It is degrading to everybody to eliminate gender. It is not degrading to anybody to acknowledge it. It is actually, it is how we recognize and achieve much of our meaning. Like it is what's the word? It's like honoring, but not honoring. It's like it is to embrace gender, is to acknowledge the meaning of everyone in a way, and gender roles to some degree. That doesn't mean certain aspects of gender roles don't evolve over time, but like there's also constraints built into what it means to be, for one gender to lead the other. Of course, charged and not and neutral. Like that's masculine and feminine, and so there is always going to be a hierarchy to that. There just is. One is feminine is reactive. It is the reactive force. Masculine is the active force. It's self-focused. It's active, and sovereign, and that it is focused on the self. And the feminine is reactive. It is focused on others. It's reacting to what others are doing. It cannot lead if that's the case. It cannot. And not only that, if you are the charged force, the active force, the masculine force, you cannot help but lead. It's not a choice that you can, I want to be the leader. No. You are no matter what. And that's why and when you recognize that it's not a choice, then it implies certain responsibilities. So now it's not about just like, this it doesn't fit well with this kind of narrative that we have now of like, the feminine women are just going to be oppressed by men being over them. And it's like, no, that's everybody has someone over them except God. And if men had no responsibilities, though, then why would women want to be under them? So it makes sense that they're bucking, like, men right now, when men are very largely not embracing responsibilities, and our entire culture, mainstream culture right now, is celebratory and encouraging of hedonistic interactions. Like, think about what college is. And I had a good time in college. I will not deny that. But I had a very different moral understanding of the world. I was an anti-theist, and I thought that I didn't realize any of this stuff yet. So I don't feel, I don't kick myself for it, but I also recognize that it wasn't like ideal. Everything in college is organized around hedonism, and but that, like, our gender dynamics are due to a lot of things. Women are right to not want to be under men right now, most men. Men who do not embrace responsibilities and try and put limits on themselves, and who are not trying to follow God and make themselves submit to a higher power. Just like, if women are going to submit to us, then then we have to submit to someone higher than us as well. So like, if they're just going to submit to us and we're not going to submit to anyone, then that's a problem. That they shouldn't do that. And so I understand why women are having a problem with men, and that's causing issues in the kind of world of gender, because we can't escape the constraints of gender, but also we are subject to them always, all of us. But we also must consciously recognize that that's the case in order to realize that, like, we have to act accordingly and treat each other well because of that. And we're not doing that. We have two sides of this that are arguing past each other, and both of them are doing harm to this narrative, I would say, to the reconciliation between the genders. That is very confusing to people. Plus, in the past, with technology being much more limited and specialization being much more rare, it was very obvious why we needed the opposite sex. And but now it's not to many people, especially to I would say, to everybody, to everybody, but even so, I would say women even more so, women can feel, they are the flowers on the tree, and because they're the flowers on the tree and men are the bees that pollinate the flowers on the tree, men are detached from the tree. They can go above the tree and see the whole big picture, but they can't tell you if the tree is healthy, or if the tree is how the tree is feeling, and is it headed in a healthy direction. But women can. Women feel when things are not going well, and that's why they act the way that they do. But men can't feel it. That's why they act the way that they do. And women are much more intuitively connected to God, but they also are in that way. Because of that, they are intuitively connected to every situation. If you look at like chess, people talk about like chess scores and stuff, and how in chess, which is not a physical sport, not really, it's a mental game. There's still a huge disparity in chess. There might be there's as much of a disparity in chess almost in chess statistics between the genders as there is in any other sport, almost. Even like physical sports, which obviously anybody honest know, or any with any experience around the opposite sex, and also who's honest, I would say, knows that there are physical limits to men and to women, very different ones, and but also that doesn't account for the difference in chess statistics. And it's not just about like interests, even though it is to some degree, and it's not just about IQ, even though it is to some degree. It's mostly actually about the fact that there are metaphysical constraints to how we feel, or how we are entangled with those around us, in the way that we feel. And this is there are differences between men and women. Men are able to detach themselves in a situation and look at things kind of objectively, and that allows them to be strategic. And women are not able to do this. What the issue though is that this same ability that men have to detach themselves also means that they won't realize when they're hurting others, whereas like women always know when they hurt others. They can't not know. That's why they they will not, to the point of even being dishonest, they will say whatever they think somebody wants to hear a lot of times. And even no matter what political side they're on. So like it's funny because people think that conservatives versus liberals, or right versus left. It's like women who are in the conservative movements are just saying exactly what they think everyone on the conservative side wants to hear. Like they're still doing exactly the same thing as women who would be liberal. They're just focusing on different people, but they're not saying what they think everybody needs to hear but nobody wants to hear. They're still saying exactly what they think everybody wants to hear. So there's no difference there. When people say things all the time about liberal women versus conservative women, it's like, no, there's not as much of a difference as we think. But because gender is much more fundamental than like who do you vote for, than your political party. But gender does manifest in politics. Like that's what the right versus the left is. That is what capitalism versus communism is, or collectivism versus individualism. It is gender constraints. But so when I said earlier that, and I kind of didn't get to this, but I'm going to do a produced video on gender because I want to be more coherent about it, and it's such an essential topic, and I think I've got an understanding of gender at this point, and I'm just being honest that I think there are very few that I think people that I've ever heard that I think understand this to the degree that I do, but there are a few that at least come close, and have said things that even I was like, oh wow, that's actually really insightful. So I'm not saying I know everything. I definitely don't, but this work has allowed for me to see this in a way that is unique and or is uncommon. I would say. I don't know if it's totally unique, but it's very rare, and because I'm able to see it from a more fundamental perspective of what is causing even like the gender that we observe and the attributes of each of those genders, and that's part of sentient singularity theory. It contextualizes where that even comes from, but when people though say on the that gender and sex are different, like I said, they're not and they are. It's not that it's both is the reality, but you have to recognize, in order to reconcile these and be like, how can you say it's both? Then it sounds like a cop-out, but it's not. If you apply this in the right context, this idea, and with directionality, then it makes sense, because what it is that gender occurs on every scale of the periodicity of sentience, and it also occurs in every instance of objective observation that we perceive, but it really occurs in the way beings manifest in their relationships on every scale of the periodicity, and it is fundamental, it is unavoidable, and it's a good thing, but it's that sex is it is the manifestation of gender on the biological level. Like, that's what it is. It's still, sex is gender, but gender is more than sex, if that makes sense. So gender is, it's not just more than sex on the human level, it's more than sex on every level of even in politics and atoms and quarks and the leptons and even bosons versus fermions. Even like, this is even a kind of a gendered relationship, and even creation, or the universe you could call it, and God, that is a gendered relationship. And it is interesting, if you think about God and his attributes, there are gendered. He has attributes of both genders, and but we call God he. We should, because he's higher than us in a hierarchy. So like, we're supposed to submit to him, and we, in our context, masculine, the male gender is, we call he, and that's the leading gender, and God is leading of everyone, and so therefore we should give him that same title. But the reality is that God has almost like a female body, and if you think about it, because creation is within God. It has to be, because God can't create outside of himself, only within himself, because he's all that is. So in a way, but he's also sovereign and leading, and in that way he's masculine. So it's like God almost has like a masculine mind but a feminine body, which is very interesting, because when you think about like a lot of the narratives of what Satan is, you think of, it's almost like it's a masculine body but a feminine mind. It's like this jealous, like focused on others, like kind of not sovereign in a way mentality that Satan is thought of. Jealousy is a feminine attribute. It's a negative one, but it's indifference is like a masculine negative attribute, but like jealousy is like a feminine, and because it's focused on others. And so Satan has like the opposite. It's like a masculine body which is incapable of creation, but a feminine mind. It's like a not sovereign mind, whereas God has a sovereign mind and also a body capable of creation, because we're created within God. So it's inevitable that that's the case, and I think that this is a beautiful thing to think about, because it really shows like the best aspects of both of us, in a way, is like women should definitely focus on that attribute of them is, and that doesn't mean, that you're worthless if you can't have children. I've talked about it before. My wife and I have had struggles with that, and people have struggles with that of different types. Even some of it is biological, some of it is cultural, and people just, I don't know, end up not getting married because men are not stepping up right now, or are also confused. Both are true, but it's just a fascinating. Gender is so fascinating to me. I'm obsessed with it, because I think it's beautiful. I think that it's the most beautiful. One of the most beautiful things about our reality is the gendered nature of it. It is the binary triality structure that I talk about, or like the Calabi-Yau manifold thing. I think as well. It's like that. It's a hierarchical structure that has hierarchy and differentiation. That's what gender is, and so it is totally fundamental. And both of those attributes have to be acknowledged in it. And so there's so many reasons why I think that we are so confused from a gender perspective. And part of it is metaphysical, but most of it is cultural, due to how human civilization has evolved as of right now, due to its relationship with technology causing issues. We're trying to untangle from each other, and we can't. Birth control has eliminated, it's like, it's really caused a lot of problems, I think, but it's a two-sided sword. At the same time, it's like, well, for one, birth control allows women to be selective of its partners and can have sovereignty over their body, and I think that in some ways that is a good thing. But at the same time, they're metaphysically not sovereign as much. Not as sovereign. They are sovereign, but they're not as sovereign as men. It's not that. It's that they're subject to men, and that is even true if all men were like, we're not going to we want women to do exactly what they want. Even that would lead women to a certain way. It wouldn't free them to be totally sovereign in the way that men are. What it would do is it would lead them away from. It would be men abandoning their responsibilities. Is the problem with that, and then there's nobody leading. So you get a chicken with its head cut off. A chicken with its head chasing a chicken with its head cut off, type of situation. Whereas like the men have a head and like women do not in this situation, and men are chasing instead of women following a man who knows where he's going, it's men chasing women who don't know where they're going, and that's where we're at right now. And there's many reasons for that, and it's I feel very very much for everybody in this, because there is no instincts stronger than sex. There is not. It is the instinct that you will literally. It's the only instinct, I think, basically, that overrides the avoidance of danger, and like almost as the norm, essentially. It will get you to basically kill yourself for it, and we're doing that right now because it's freely accessible. It's not freely accessible because it's accessible without commitment and without responsibility because of birth control. Men are not behaving. They're not. It's not leading men towards the embracing of responsibility, and they're not choosing it consciously, because they don't even realize that they either don't realize that they should, which is one instance, or they realize that they should, but they don't realize why they're not being led. Like I had this happen when I was deciding to get married. I was like, why? Even though I know that this, I mean, I knew the first night that I met my wife that I was probably going to marry that girl. I said it, and not to her, but to my friends and family. But I, even after years and years, and after realizing like this is the girl that I want, I still was like, why don't I feel compelled? You know, like it's not that I feel hesitant. It's just I'm not feeling compelled. It's because we were living together and we were, you know, we had not waited until marriage to engage in sexual relations, and that is a problem. But it was, you know, when we met, it was 8 years ago. I didn't have the same mindset that I have now. I thought that it should not be withheld, that you should try and see if you are compatible with the person in that way before marriage. I think that that's wrong. You can actually figure that out without doing that. But if you do that before, it kind of it postpones what starts to drive you to marriage, especially as a man, which it becomes much later in life when everybody else, and it's kind of dependent on everybody else. It's like, okay, you're the only one who's not married, and it feels weird to say my girlfriend as you get older, and so you don't want to be, you know, seen as immature, so you end up getting married. But you're not. Whereas that's different than like Orthodox communities where they get married right away because they want to have sex, and it's still used, still a useful carrot, and it's not in mainstream society today. So that's causing a lot of problems as well. I mean, so many problems. I was thinking about this a lot lately. Is, you know, how we educate in non-Orthodox non-religious communities, I guess you could say, the mainstream, where we have unsegregated schools and education systems. And I think that I think as you get older, there are certain topics that you can be together on, and like if you both want to study, I don't know, like astronomy, like that shouldn't necessarily be segregated. But you also don't need to go to school the way that we do now to learn that stuff. And if you do, then you will never be a good astronomer. The best people who are in any subject are self-motivated to teach themselves about it, and they will find people to learn under, and especially today with the internet. But our lack of segregation, gender segregation, is a huge problem. The way in which we dress even is causing problems. The way, like I said, birth control is causing problems. The lack of awareness of God is causing problems. There's so many reasons why we are having gender issues. I would say the main thing, though, is a lack of context in all of this. The way in which we are living is causing us to miss the context of gender, and that's the main problem. I mean, if we're gonna back up and look at it, it's just fascinating to me. It's the most fascinating subject. I'm like a little bit obsessive about it, and so I'm looking forward to speaking more about it on here, because we can get into even, you know, is there an objective reality to like what is modest and what is not? Like, obviously there's a relativity to modesty, but like, is there a super subjectivity or an objectivity to modesty? Like, and to, you know, expectations and responsibilities and things like that. There definitely is. And we're going to talk about it a lot as time goes on, but I want to make a produced video about it because I want to be coherent, and much more coherent than I am able to be in a live stream. But we're really confused about gender. Also, it is very tied to sexual orientation, and sexuality is another thing that I applied sentient singularity to, and I will make a video about it because that one it's even more obviously amazing in its reconciliation, because it's like something very simple as far as defining what sexual orientation even is, when it comes to the truth. And like, I applied sentient singularity theory to, and the context of it and the patterns within it to sexual orientation to see if it would make sense of kind of the relativistic endlessness of where we're kind of at with it, and where we're at with it is in this endless hedonistic treadmill, essentially, that is also simultaneously diminishing the meaning of all of us to each other, and in many ways, and it's diminishing our own meaning, and so it's a very big problem. But it is kind of the governing relationship between genders, and that's why it's it's obviously tied to it. And I applied sentient singularity theory to sexual orientation, and it was perfectly reconciled. Like, you have 2 degrees of freedom. That's it. That basically means that there's only objectively 2 sexual orientations, and it's not gay and straight. It's one of them is, I just call it common, and the other one is queer, which is a name that we already have. And it just, common means you are attracted to the opposite sex. It doesn't matter what else. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to know. You don't need to know. Like, it doesn't matter. Are you attracted to the opposite sex? We do need to know that, for the sake of like us holding each other accountable for our own responsibilities to how we treat each other, and also knowing whether or not I should be, how should I interact with you? Are you a potential mate or not? Like, that is something that we do need to know. So, politically, you have everybody. I dropped my ring. You have everybody reacting to each other. A chicken with its chasing chickens with their heads cut off type of situations in politics right now, where you have people saying, okay, this should be this way because of the Bible, which not everybody sees the divinity of Scripture. I do, but I didn't always, and not everybody does. And this is meant to apply to everyone, so you can't just start there. And I don't think that you have to either, but we can't start where we've started. And then eventually you have, marriage structure ends up falling apart because it's not based on fundamental reality, even though we might have it right, but we're not explaining it with we're not explaining a fundamental foundation of why it's right, which is what's happening with when you're trying to explain the values conveyed in Scripture to people that don't believe that it's divine. You're not telling them why something is the way that it is. You can't just say God, because if they don't already see that, then their conceptualization of God is not there. But then what happens is you have we start changing what marriage is and defined legally, and then all of a sudden you have people on the right say, okay, well, actually, I don't think that gender should be involved in the government at all. Like, or sexual orientation, like, why does that matter at all? Why is that a government? Like, why does that have anything to do with the group at large? And of course it's important to the group at large. Everybody intuitively knows this. That's why even people who tend to lean kind of towards the liberal or left mentality or narratives on this stuff are making it a part of their public identity, is because it has to be part of your public identity. But what they're making as part of their public identity is not what should be part of your public identity. It's just, are you attracted to the opposite sex or are you not attracted to the opposite sex? That's it. Common is you are attracted to the opposite sex. It's defined by that. Queer is you're not attracted to the opposite sex. It's defined by that. It's not defined by what you are attracted to, or what is your main what are you most attracted to or anything like that. Same thing with, you know, why it can't be start with straight and gay either, is like, if you start with straight even, then you're already setting the criteria for which every other definition that comes after that is defined by that which is your preference already. And like, that is already going to lead that constraint, that the way in which that word, what that word means, which is, there's nothing wrong with it, but if that is how we label sexual orientations, it's only about you. It's not about others. It's not about a relationship with others. And of course it has to be. It's a relationship between the genders. Your sexual orientation is about your relationship. It's how you orient in the sexual relations of the genders. Like, so it has to be about others. And it's not about your preferences. And so we have serious problems with this. Is we have set up from the start, we have misdefined what a sexual orientation even is. Right now, what we call sexual orientation is really preferences. That's, or like, just what you think is arousing. That's not sexual orientation. That's just preferences, or, it's not the same thing. And those things cannot define how we relate to each other, because they are fundamentally not acknowledging of each other. So but if you recognize that there should be 2 degrees of freedom, which is what sentient singularity theory would imply, it can't be gay and straight. It has to be queer and common, essentially. Queer just meaning you're not attracted to the opposite sex. Neither one of these is derogatory, by the way. And common just means you are attracted to the opposite sex. And if you are, it doesn't matter what else. It's like, you could be attracted to the opposite sex and lampshades, or the opposite sex and the same sex. It doesn't matter. You're attracted to the opposite sex? Okay, now you have certain responsibilities. You got to get married. Like, that's your job. And, but if you are not attracted to the opposite sex, we need to know that too, because we need to know whether or not you are like a option for people to marry. Like, and you're probably not if you are not attracted to the opposite sex. This also gives, because of the context of this relation, of this structure that I'm laying out, when I'm going to put a full video out about it eventually, it gives everybody meaning, but it also makes it so that this is not about hedonism anymore. It must be about hedonism if a sexual orientation is defined by what you're attracted to. It must lead to hedonism, because it is based on your preferences, and that's it. It's not about your relationship with others. And it's not an orientation. Orientation is orienting. It is, how do you achieve your awareness enough to know how to move? North, south, east, and west. Inside, outside, separate, oneness. That's my, 4 primary perspectives. And it is funny how much they are, like, they kind of describe sex in a way. Inside, outside, separate, and oneness. But so that is a fundamental relationship that is going on there. But because now this new structure isn't about just like telling the world what we are into, and like therefore following it wherever it leads us. It is actually constraining of us all, but also giving us all meaning, and it's also inclusive of everybody. If you think about, we keep having to add letters to like the like LGBTQAI etc. alphabet soup, and we were going to run out of letters, and we shouldn't even be adding these letters anyways, because it's just, we don't need a definition for people who are sexually attracted to anything other than than just, are you attracted to the opposite sex or are you not? And we don't need a definition for people who are attracted to cars or lamps or couches or whatever, or anything else that is not honoring of each other and acknowledging of the realities of the meaning of creation. Like, creation is part of this. And that means that everybody's role has to support that structure. You can't be separate from it and just like be going into hedonism. Everything is about supporting the nuclear family, even if you're not meant to be a part of it directly. Like, you're meant to be supportive of it indirectly. And I'm not saying I know exactly what the best way to do that is, but my work definitely implies that is kind of your responsibility. And if you're not meant to be married because you are not attracted to the opposite sex, then you still have a job. It's still your responsibility to support the nuclear family and a culture of the nuclear family, not a culture opposed to the nuclear family. And even straight culture is opposed to the nuclear family right now. Like, there is no mainstream culture other than I've gotten old and now I kind of want to snatch somebody up so that I can, deteriorate with them essentially and still have someone, or I'm not feeling FOMO around my married friends or something. Like, that's still hedonism driving it. It's just your own feelings. It's not, even if it's driving you to something good, it's not because you're doing it because it is for good reasons. It's because of selfish reasons. And our straight culture right now is totally hedonistic. And so people like look at pride parades and stuff right now and they get upset about it, and I understand that, but at the same time, why are you not upset about the frat party happening in college where literally like they're having giant parties where girls drink for free? It's funny, many years ago there was a narrative in the probably like 5 years ago, it was more common to say the left was saying that college has a rape culture about it. And I remember being on the right and being like, there's no rape culture to college. And even when I was working at PragerU, I heard Dennis Prager say, if college had a rape culture, you wouldn't send your daughter to it. And that's true, but you're thinking about rape in a different way, which is just that it is only in this forced, physically violent situation. But if you recognize that women are not, that they are reactive, it means that it doesn't necessarily have to be that in order for it to be non-consensual. But you'll never know outside of marriage, really, that it's definitely consensual, because you need to choose to consent outside of the situation itself in order to allow women to choose to consent truly, because they're too tied to the situation in the moment, and for many reasons, even instinctually. Like, imagine if, like, in caveman times, if women fought back against men who tried to, sleep with them, and they would be raped if they submitted, and essentially, and they then would have children at least and procreate, or they would be killed probably. And so, like, even instinctually, it was like, it's probably the case that it's instinctual for women to submit in situations like that, and then but that doesn't mean that it's consensual. But like, if you think about it even more, it's like, even if that's not the case, why are women drinking free at these parties? You're trying to get them intoxicated enough to sleep with somebody. Is that not a rape culture? I mean, I thought about it later on. I was like, actually, I won't send my daughter to college. She might want to go eventually to study something specific, and if she wants to do that, then that's one thing. But if she's not just going to college just because she wants to go to college, and neither are my sons, because I don't want them going to these parties and doing this to other people's daughters. Like, that there has to be a reason for for college. I think it's that you're going like, and it's not just for the social experience. What that really means is for hedonism. It's for partying. And I had a blast doing it, I will admit. But I didn't know better. And, I know better now. So I have to be honest and admit that what I was doing was not right, even though I don't blame myself because I didn't know better. But I do now. I have to say what I know now. So, this is what the problem is when the left sees the right saying certain things and the right sees the left doing certain things, and everybody's right and everybody's wrong because nobody's moving. When people say the men need to lead, women need to, stop leading, and it's like men can't help but lead. That's the context of of gender dynamics. Protons cannot help but have a charge. They are charged. And neutrons are not charged. They are charge dependent. That they cannot help it. They will either follow a negative force like an electron, which is like, it's just if they're following a negative force and they're unbound to a positive force, then basically what's happening is that they're just at the mercy of the sexual energy without leadership, which is hedonism. And so, but straight culture is hedonistic. It's just as hedonistic there's multiple straight cultures, I would say, or there's multiple common cultures or cultures for common people that would be straight culture, which is one of them is like marriage and Orthodox Jews and Christians and Muslims and communities, truly conservative communities, not people who just call themselves conservative and vote Republicans or something, but truly conservative moral community. And then there's also the mainstream hedonistic community where like we send it's totally hedonistic. How is it not? It's completely hedonistic. There's hedonism and not and embracing of responsibilities, and that's it. There is no degrees to there is degrees to hedonism, but there's only two paths. One is hedonism and one is responsibility and meaning and goodness and growth and love, and the other one is just hedonism. And so once you go down the path, there's like you can go further down the path or not as far, but you are still down that path. You can't be in between the paths. So there's so much wrong with gender right now. I hope that was just interesting to listen to. I know it was kind of rambly, but there's, gender, because it's a fundamental structure, it's one of those things where it's like, it's either we've got it or we don't. And when we don't have anything. And when we've got it, we've got everything. And right now in mainstream culture, we've got nothing. It's the same thing with my paper. It's like, you have to work in this realm of simultaneity because it's, this is an instance of like the lack of kind of recognizing the transcendentness of or the simultaneity, I guess you could almost say, of gender dynamics. Is I remember when I was younger, I said things like, there's a double standard, get over it. It's like, okay, what is a double standard? A double standard would be that makes sense. Is like women should be women and men have different responsibilities as far as how they dress and what is modest because we have different bodies and that's just the reality, and because we have different minds and so we respond differently to each other when we see each other's bodies, and also we have differences in our physical strength. So like maybe a woman shouldn't walk home by herself as much as a man maybe could. Because it's also she's just much more likely to be victimized in ways that men just are much less likely to be in that circumstance. But then there's double standards that don't make sense. And I remember having these double standards that don't make sense when I would say things like, um, you know, I when you say like, I don't want my daughter going to college frat parties, but like my son, you know, he can go, and it's like, first of all, that you're still promoting the culture that you're trying to hide, that you're trying to protect your daughter from, and or your sister or whatever, and so you're not really protecting them. You're just delaying the effect on them, and if you, so people will, somebody said on Twitter the other day, they said something like, so Jonah Hill, let's use this example. Jonah Hill recently, and I say good for him. He very respectfully, it seems, in his text messages with his, I don't know, girlfriend or fiance or wife. I don't know. I try not to gossip, but like this was a very big topic right now in the Twitter space. Is like, was he in the wrong for saying he didn't want her to be posting bikini pictures and going and hanging out with guy friends in the same way that she had in the past, or and just living in a different, in a more hedonistic way if you wanted, and if they wanted to also have a family and get married and stuff like that. And he was like, you can choose, but it's up to you, like, and but I don't want that in my partner, in my spouse. And people said, I saw people make comments of like, we who are we to tell, like, basically it was inappropriate for him to expect certain modesty standards from some girl, but then somebody said, but if it's my daughter, then then she's gonna have to like live this way. And I have even friends that have said this to me. They'll be like, they'll see some someone dressed a certain way, they'll be like, I can't believe their parents would allow them to dress like that. I would never let my daughter. But then they're not expecting that of their people they're dating or anything like that, or their spouse, and these are like double standards is what I'm trying to say. I'm struggling to say it properly, but or if you say, here's a very obvious way. I don't know why I got so off track with it, but if a guy sleeps with multiple women and you're like, that's good for him, and he doesn't marry them, and that's okay, that's not okay, because but if you're not okay with that with your daughter, like, I respect somebody who's consistent. If you encourage people to be hedonistic, then you should encourage everybody to be hedonistic, not just one gender or the other. Because if you just encourage men, they're sleeping with other people's daughters and then leaving. How is that okay? If it's not. It's not, and so this is very much a double standard kind of issue happening right now in masculinity movements, especially, where it's kind of celebrated to sleep with a lot of women, but then it's like shamed for women to sleep with a lot of men. And the reality is that it should be shameful. I'm not saying we should shame people. I'm saying it should be shameful. It is shameful. I'm saying it is shameful for any of us to sleep around. It's just diminishing of somebody's value. You're using them in a way that is disposable, and it also is damaging. But it might impact women immediately in a negative way. But the reality is that people say, oh, well, sleeping around impacts women negatively, it doesn't impact men. This is what I'm just trying to get at. That's not true. The more women are hurt by being used by men, the less women there are out there. The more that the women that are out there for you to then choose a spouse from are hurt. And so then you're hurt too, because you're not going to as easily find somebody who is, not as confused. to be your partner. And it's like, well, you helped confuse them because you had a double standard. Like, you can't have that double standard. Even I recognize that it's obvious that things impact the genders differently, but there's no double standard. You can't expect women to be modest and men not to be modest. It just means something different for men to be modest than it means for women to be modest. But you must expect men to be modest if you expect women to be modest. And if you don't expect women to be modest, then you can't expect men to be modest, and vice versa. You have to be consistent and honest, and that's it. That's really all that is like required of anybody, is consistency and honesty. And I don't think we should be trying to trick people into doing the right thing. They should do the right thing if they know it's the right thing, and if they don't know it's the right thing, then they should be honest about that, and we should give them grace for it. That's it. Trying to trick people into doing the right thing, or expecting, certain things when it's not founded on a true fundamental foundation, is going to eventually cause decoherence that will eventually unravel everything, which is what we're seeing now. But gender is that fundamental structure. So if you want women who are, good marriage quality, well, then you have less of a body count. If you're a man, then you have to not contribute to body count of women, and you have to get married early. Like, that's what it means. It doesn't mean you can't go have your fun and then get married and expect women to, all of them to be there. Like, mathematically, it doesn't make sense. So, but it hurts both of us. There's no impact on men and women that impacts men positively and women negatively. That's like the key takeaway from gender dynamics, is like anything that hurts men hurts women, and anything that hurts women hurts men. It just hurts us at different times and in different ways, but it always hurts us both. Anything that is good for men is good for women, and anything that is good for women is good for men. It's just, do you see the big picture? Yeah, it doesn't hurt men as much to sleep with a bunch of people in the immediacy. It does later, and because we're entangled, we are one. There is humanity. There isn't men versus women. It's humanity. You eliminate women, then you also eliminate men. You eliminate men, you also eliminate women. And but we're so confused due to so many things. Our education system is teaching us wrong things, and it's got us in a context that doesn't make sense. And our work environments have got us in a context that doesn't make sense and is totally artificial. And the way we dress, the music we listen to, the things we watch, it's very hard to overcome right now. We really are starting to see the negative impacts of it, but it's very hard to escape. You have to kind of just confront it first, and then change the culture, because you can't really escape it unless you're going to go live in an Amish community or something like that, or Orthodox Hasidic Jewish community or something. But even then, you're not escaping it. People say things like, we need to ban pornography, and we need to. It's like everything is porn in the mainstream culture now. Everything. Your music is porn. Your ads are porn. Your beaches are people walking around in their underwear. Your movies are pornographic. Everything is porn. And that's much more I think that's much more impactful on us negatively than the things that you have to seek out, like, what the things that we call porn today. But it's like everything is porn. That's the problem. And so you can't allow for everything else to be porn and just not call it porn, and then try and get rid of just the things that we call porn. You're not addressing the true reality of the situation or the problem. It's a different thing. So everybody's talking past each other, and in this situation, and it's very hard, I think, for women to see the value of men until they're around a valuable man and that has committed to them. And so if we're like, I remember I used to go with Will Witt when I worked at PragerU. We would interview men and women on the street. We'd ask them, can a man do everything a woman can do? Can a woman do everything a man can do? And it was like one of the first videos where people started asking this in public. And now tons of people have done it, but the pattern was pretty remarkable at the time, and now it's just commonplace where women pretty much universally said women could do everything a man can do, and men pretty much universally said the opposite, that men can't do everything a woman could do. And I felt like part of that was honestly even posturing. Like, it's almost like I don't even know how much they believed in what they were saying. They were just trying to appease the women around them. And so nobody's leading in this situation. And it's hard, though, to expect this from women when men aren't making themselves valuable to women. Like, you have to make yourself valuable. But we don't really know how to do that because technology has made it so that outsourcing is very possible, which it just doesn't make men less valuable. It just makes women not see the value of men in that situation. Like when they call a plumber to fix the pipes in their house, or an electrician, and it's some guy, or they go get their car fixed at the mechanic, they're not thinking, oh yeah, this is why I need a man around. Because they're not thinking about this as a man. It's the mechanic. It's the plumber. It's this non-gendered person that could be it could be man or woman. They don't, they think, but that's not necessarily true either. Otherwise it would be much more blended. But, so we have not eliminated the role of men. Look at the buildings around us. Who do you think built those? But at the same time, we have made it hard to see the value of men. And technology is making it hard to see the value of men. But it has not actually eliminated the value of men at all. At all. Not even in the slightest. And in anything. Protection, anything. Like, at all. And it's just caused a detachment and a lack of context for everyone. The context of gender is marriage. And if you eliminate that, you have eliminated the context of gender, and everybody will become confused. It is a moral responsibility for everyone who is at least sexually attracted to the opposite sex to get married. That's it. And we've eliminated that. I asked people once in a physics Discord many years ago, I said, we were talking about voting or something, and I said, I thought only married people should vote. And Elon Musk recently posted on Twitter, I think, or something, he said in an interview that only people with children should vote. And I understand why he said that, but it is wrong, and it could cause incentive structures that backfire. But he's getting there, but he's not there. Marriage is the thing. And because it's a choice of responsibility. You could have kids in it and not choose it, in which case it's not a mindset change. You want people who have a mindset of a certain mindset, and not just people who have certain constraints, which is what having a child does. But it does also sometimes create a certain mindset, but that mindset is created in marriage as well. And also you don't want politics to become a proxy war between men and women, which is exactly what it is. Like the Democrats versus Republicans in the United States it is a proxy war between men and women. Why was there a women's march when Trump was elected? Because politics is a proxy war between men and women. And you can see it. The first video I ever filmed on the street when working for PragerU was a women's march with Will Witt. You can look it up. And it was amazing to me to see hundreds of thousands of women out there marching. And honestly, they did not know why they were marching. But I, at the time, denied their feelings. And that was wrong. They are right to be upset with men. But it was obvious that they were upset with men. It wasn't just about Trump. Trump had not done anything yet. He was not even in office, I don't think. But it was about men. And it was very angry with men. They have every right to be right now, to be frustrated with their relationship with men. And it is up to men to fix it, because men are the leaders. We can't not be the ones to fix it. We have to be the ones to fix it, I think. But that's very hard because of the culture that we live in, is so incentivizing of hedonism everywhere you look. Every song you listen to, every ad you see, every movie you watch, and but it like it was very clear to me that at that point that politics was a proxy war between men and women at this stage, and it is, and that's a horrible thing. We cannot be at war against each other. To be at war against each other is to be at war against ourselves. To be against women is to be against men. To be against men is to be against women. And that is just absolutely true. So, but you can't talk past each other either. You have to acknowledge the legitimacy of feelings, and it's tough. People often say, who are tend to be more focused on gender differences, and I used to be like this too. It's like, oh, women are just emotional and men are logical. No. Emotions, feelings drive everyone's actions. Men are able to detach themselves from others and think about situations objectively and be strategic, and also be unknowingly damaging to people as well. Like, that's how you can have frat parties where women drink free, and then also not realize that you would never want your daughter to go there, but you wouldn't want to stop anyone else's daughter. It's you're not being conscious of it. It's hard to picture that in your mind, why that's bad if you don't have, especially if you don't have kids yourself, or a wife. And in that situation that we've created, which didn't always exist as part of mainstream culture, it was like always existed as rebellious teenagers or whatever, like having parties in the forest or something. But that is not the same thing as being societally endorsed, and sustained and encouraged. And but this is, they don't even realize that they're hurting people, like, and so you have to give grace. Everybody has to give grace to everybody in this, like, more than almost any other topic, because we've all hurt each other so badly. But we also have to change, and it is, I think, up to men to be the beginning of that. If a man made himself from the start, and this also starts with parents, someone worthy of being followed by a woman and being married, and then also choosing it early, women would do it. Like, women want to marry their high school sweethearts. Like, men are the ones that are like, I want to hit double digits before I settle down. Like, it's like not we have to change our mindset first, because otherwise we lead them to that, hit double digits before settling down. It's like, you don't want them to do that, then you can't do that. And but there's so many reasons why gender is a problem, and you have to fix a lot of things simultaneously. That's the issue. But also with directionality, which means you have to admit a hierarchy. You have to admit it's men's responsibility to do this, to fix this. Men will complain a lot of, like, masculinity focused spaces that I think is actually very often led astray. But it will say things like, they'll complain that women are the or they'll acknowledge and also sometimes complain that women are the controllers of sex. Women are the ones who decide whether or not you are able to have access to sex as a man in a consensual circumstances, which is what we should always have, obviously. And that's true, but men are the ones who control women's access to marriage. Women cannot get married without men choosing it. Men are the ones that decide. Women can want to marry a man as much as they want. They'll never do it if the man doesn't decide that he is willing to let it happen and to do it. And he has to do it. It's not even like letting it happen. Women, it's different. With sex, it's like they just have to let it happen. It's they're not the active force. They are the receiving force. If you think about like even like everything involving the sexes, everything about women's gender dynamics, women are the receivers. Men give their money to women by buying them lunch and paying for the dates and being very often primary breadwinner, not all the time, but it's kind of expected to be a breadwinner, even if you're not making the most money. That's fine, but like to be a provider is to be masculine, and women are to absorb the things that you provide, and that's also true of the physical action of sex, obviously, and it's also true in the language that we use. It's like we talk about the dynamics of sex. We don't say, oh, that girl is like giving it to that guy. We say like, he's giving it and she's taking it. It's like there is a different. You cannot both be the same nature. You have to acknowledge differences and different roles. And so men, like women, don't give sex; they allow it. Men have to give marriage. They can't allow marriage. They have to actively give it. It is an active choice. It is against your nature. It's a free will choice. At least for me, it was. It was like the most free will choice I ever had. And so it's also very difficult one sometimes. Not because you're just like hesitant, but because it's just so. In our current culture, it's not. There's nothing pushing you to it until way later in life, and it should be pushed very early. The energy that we have, that we put towards partying and hooking up and going to the bars and drinking on Fridays and Thursdays and Saturdays in college, and partying, that energy happens right at a specific moment in our lives, and it did not evolve for that. It evolved, not even for sex. It evolved to allow you to stay up with screaming babies that don't sleep very well, because that's the time when you're supposed to be like having lots of kids biologically, and it's like your early 20s, and very late teens, early 20s, like that is the biological ideal time for us to be having children. And because your hormones are already motivating you to go have sex, starting like 14, it's not about that energy that you have in your early 20s and when you're like 18 to like 25, that's not there so that you can go get laid at the bar. That's there so you can raise children and stay up late and then still get up the next day. And we're just using it to basically use each other in the hedonistic normative culture of like going to the bars and stuff and partying, and it's just decoupling us from the proper context of why we have the instincts we have, why we have the strengths we have, why the ability we have, the limits we have, why we are have the relationships with the genders that we do, like with our own gender, with the gender of others. If you don't have a good relationship with the gender that you're not going to have a good relationship with the gender that you are either. And I think that's also causing gender confusion. It's like, if you don't know what a man is and you're a woman, then it's really hard to know what a woman is. And if you're a man and you don't know what a woman is, it's really hard to know what a man is. It is. It's not as simple as people make it out to be. It's not just about chromosomes and wombs and hips and breasts and like genitals. It's not just about that, because what if you changed all of that with gene therapy and surgeries, and you could now have children if you were born male but you've had a womb grown and 3D printed for you, and that out of your own cells, and you've had gene therapy, and like, what then? I say you're still going to be limited, because my model implies that gender is more fundamental than that. It's more fundamental than genes. It's not. That's why you can't say it's just genes. It's more fundamental than genes. You can't even. You would not be. You could not transition completely, I would say, no matter how good technology gets. Even if you could do everything that we think of as the things that that the opposite sex can do, in terms of just like physically, you still would not be there. You would, if you were born a female, you would still be tied to the universe in a way that gives you amazing gifts of intuition, but also limits in terms of strategicness. And if you were born a man, you would still be given have those amazing gifts of strategicness, but also those limits of, empathy, essentially. And so people are confused by their own gender because they're confused by the other gender. It's like, this is why I'm saying you either have everything or you have nothing. It's because it's a fundamental structure, and it's so entangled. You cannot break one piece of this knot. Like, if you cut this knot, you just cut this. Let's say we just cut this one. The whole knot comes apart. It's not just that strand, and that is gender. It is a knot of us. We are knotted together, and we're one string though, and not two strings. And so this is a problem that you have to fix on multiple levels at once, which requires a total shift in how you want to raise your kids differently than the mainstream culture. And at the same time, you can't just raise them only in a religious environment either, if it's lacking foundations that would be able to withstand the questions of the secular world, and it'd have to be built on. You'd have to have a logical framework and not just blind faith, not even blind faith, but non-fundamentally founded faith. And in which case, that's not faith, that's awareness. But that's hard even in the religious community. So that's why people will say, "Oh yeah, I was, a Christian, but now I'm an atheist." It's like, no, you never understood. If theism or even Christianity specifically is real and true, then you couldn't have understood it and then not. Once you understand it, you understand it. But sometimes you might think you understand it, but you don't, and that's when you leave. Same thing happens on the other side of this too, and but it's just different because one of them takes what you're taught in school as scripture, and the other one also takes what you're taught in school as scripture, but they're claiming different origins for the information that they're teaching. But still, the way in which you're taught it is the same, which is a problem too. This is why it's so important to live what you think is true, because it is the best way for one communicate to others what is true in a real sense. They can see whether or not it's working. That's why judge ideas and cultures and actions by their fruit. That's very key. Even if you don't understand it, it's like, guys, I don't understand Mormon scripture at all. I tried to read it. I do see some things in it, but I can't deny the fruit of it. So there's something there, and and that's just, you got to admit that kind of thing with all things that you see, because there's limits to your understanding. But that's true of gender dynamics too. You have to look at the fruit of certain lifestyles. And I will say certain lifestyles don't have much fruit, and certain lifestyles the only way for like fundamental fruit to be generated, which is other additional sentience and love as the relationship between them. I think that there's so many problems with gender. I'm going to make an entire episode that's not live about this topic because I'm so passionate about it. And I also think I have a lot of understanding of it, even if I'm rambling here. And I think it's also one of the most critical subjects that we have. I mean, look at the topics that we talk about constantly in politics. It's all about gender, all of it. And therefore, even though it talks about sexual orientation, they're about gender. That's the same topic. It's just how do we act in gender. Like that's what that topic is. It's not separate, and it's so entangled, and it is controlling of our politics. You want people in politics who are leaders to, and not just the leaders, but also the voters. Like everything, you want politics to be based around, to be constructed and run by people from top down and from the bottom up, which means from the king or president down and prime minister, whatever, to the voters up. It needs to be constructed of people who have a certain understanding of others, which is why I say only married people should vote. It's of fundamentally others. Like, you cannot understand women without being married. Like, you hear people who are like hookup gurus and stuff, and they'll say things like, they understand women really well. No, they understand women enough in the context in which they operate in order to get them to do what they want. That is true. That is not the same thing as understanding women. If you understood women enough, you wouldn't be trying to do that. Teach other men to, hook up with women. You would not be doing that. You would be trying to not do that even yourself. And I recognize that sex is a powerful force, and everybody struggles with their own vices. But you certainly wouldn't be publicly make it your mission to teach men to do that. So I never understood, if you look at, I remember Andrew Tate said in an interview, and I'm not trying to rip on anybody too hard here. Like I said, this is a really tough subject. But I heard him say something like, the world would be fixed if all women had their body count on their forehead. And I get what he's saying. It's but at the same time, that wouldn't fix the world. And also there is also a celebration of, if you're not married, and I don't know if he's married or not. I've heard rumors that he might be. But the thing is if you are and you're not making that public, then you're still failing. And to promote what is good. And but if you're not promoting marriage, then you can't judge women for having high body counts. That's this. If you're not promoting men picking one and sticking with it from the start, and then there's just an inconsistency there. But like I said, it's very easy to be incoherent when the entire system that you're operating in is incoherent. So it starts with a couple things always. And to begin to understand anything, it starts with language. And that's why when I tried to make sense of sexual orientation, narrowing down or realizing, not even narrowing down or defining, realizing that there's only two, and what those are, is going to be a very key thing, I think, to moving this conversation forward. Just like my project, Sentient Singularity Theory, kicked off with understanding the four primary perspectives, which are simultaneous and entangled. You can't, if you understand one of them, you understand all of them. If you don't understand any of them, then you don't understand all of them. Same thing with gender. You can't understand men without understanding women, and vice versa. And you can't understand them without living with them. and choosing to live with them, not like your friends or whatever and your roommates. I mean, like, you're building a life together, which means you're going through the motions of life with each other. You're not just living together and I don't know, hanging out, but like you're seeing the process of trying to have a family and aging and failing, not failing, but it be, being unable to have children when you're trying, or being able to have children when you're trying. Like, both of those will give you understanding of the opposite gender and therefore of your own. But you can't understand each other if you're not entangled. If your fate is not the same. Like, I lived with women in college. I had 2 female roommates at one point, and I had close friends even who were women, and it didn't help me understand them that much, not enough to because at the same time, like I've said before, if you're not one unit, then what impacts one of you negatively doesn't impact the other one necessarily. Whereas, like, if you're one unit, if anything impacts my wife negatively, it impacts me negatively. If anything impacts her positively, it impacts me positively. If you're not that entangled, you can't understand each other. So this is tough. It starts with language, like making the language proper, and this is also why the redefining of marriage, or the misdefining of marriage, I will say that. I think that's my current perspective on it. The misdefining of marriage broke everything. But it was already broken in the first place if we were even able to do that. So there was something broken anyways. But it was the thing that gave way to everything else. And because just like understanding those 4 primary perspectives allowed me to do everything else, understanding what are the 2 sexual orientations will probably help us, I think. That's a key part of this project, or things like that. While I do have an experiment that I would like to have done regarding gravity and sentience, and that is part of this project's goals. I think the main thing for this project is I would like it to lead to an understanding that is more fundamentally true of reality, that would lead to also helping us cause order and love and in our lives, and goodness and growth, peace. And of course it would if it was true, if it was accurate, and you understood it and you applied it. That's what any when you understand what is true, you end up getting results. And so if you understand what is fundamentally true, it will have impacts on every level of life, including social and political and moral. It's kind of my main personal focus, even though on this channel I focus a lot on physics, because you have to start foundationally. Like, our physics our physics narratives. If you don't think our physics narratives impact our politics, you are wrong. Of course they do. Of course they do. Our theological narratives impact our politics. Our physics narratives impact our politics. And our morals, and our economics, and our families. Like, it impacts everything. So I'm focusing on physics a lot lately, but that is. I'm not just trying to help us crack anti-gravity. Actually, I don't even think it would be a very good thing if we did, to be quite honest, even though I do think it's probably possible. There are reasons why I think it's not a technology that we should have right now. But there are more important things than just like cool toys and tech. Even though I like cool toys and tech, but that's not for what purpose? Us, and so you have to contextualize things. I went on and on and on there. Let's see the chat. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Guys, you might have to enter in your question multiple times if you really want to see it, or you can super chat I would very much appreciate it, but you don't have to. But it does help because this is a very long chat that's happening right now, which is awesome. It's great to see like this. The live engagement keeps me very motivated to come back because impacting others is what gives you meaning. If I was on here and nobody was listening and all I was paying attention to were like view counts after the fact, it's dehumanizing. There's no interaction there. It's just like a tally mark. And it got very old for me at the beginning of this channel. Yeah, Tyler elaborates on this idea. Okay. Oh my gosh, there's so much. Ethan. Why not? All holy men hid from the world in esoteric societies. I think that is... I understand why that can kind of happen naturally, but I also think that we're not meant to hide. But we're not meant to force others either. Like, if you have a truth, something, if you understand something that's true, no matter who you are, your job is to say it, but say it in context. And I will also say that, people say the good, the true, and the beautiful to describe the fundamental reality. The good, the true, and the beautiful. What is fundamental is good, it is true, it is beautiful. And I would also add one more thing in that it is kind. And but kind is or you could maybe say humble. It is humble, which is kind of kind but also honest, and meaning like there are two in Jewish metaphysics, and there's like this 10 sephirot, or 10 aspects of the mind of God, which is it's basically a decision tree of consciousness that people came up with doing metaphysics work many thousand of years ago. I don't know how long ago. It's probably always existed, but it's just in different formats. But that is a gendered structure as well, and it mirrors the standard model, which is amazing. And kindness is a masculine attribute. It's funny because we think of it as a feminine one here in our common narratives, but it's not. That shows how twisted we are. And it doesn't flip-flop. It doesn't change. Severity is a feminine attribute on this, in this framework that was put forth. And I think that is consistent with my work. And I think it seems to be also consistent with the world in which we live, even though I understand why people have it confused. But I think it's because when we're focusing on the information that's been told to us out of context about the world and politics in general, there is this masculinity that this viewpoint of masculinity that is presented to us secondhand, out of context, that's wrong, because it's out of context. That makes things wrong, or wrong enough. And it's actually not masculinity that we're seeing that really led to what they're the actions that they're describing in history, and very often sometimes, but it was both. It's like the detachment of masculinity and the severity of femininity without the kindness, and of masculinity, and the context of femininity is what leads to horrible human atrocities. But it's both always. But severity is considered a feminine trait, which it is. It's pretty obvious. It's becoming more obvious now that as we get more out of more incoherent in our gender understandings and politics, it actually kind of oddly makes it more obvious what is wrong in some ways, and but you have to have some type of starting place of assuming that it is wrong in order to see that in the first place. But it's there's so much that we have to fix, and it honestly doesn't take that much in order to fix it, or to orient properly again, to start to orient in order to navigate this chaos that we're in. And you can navigate chaos, but you have to, in order to do that, you have to have a heading or foundational like perspective that gives you direction and allows you to fundamentally orient and know where you should be going. So you must know that. And then all you have to do is find those first initial key decisions that kind of contextualize everything else. Like, if you know that marriage is the ideal, then get married. You know, if you know that that sleeping around hurts people and encourages hedonism, or that hedonism and sexuality is not a good thing to celebrate, then you have to stop doing that and you have to do the opposite. Or not do the opposite, but you have to do what is positive. You know, you have to do, you can't just avoid, you know, confronting this. You have to navigate it. You cannot avoid it. You see this a lot with like purity cultures and stuff in very religious, but like authoritative, communities where things are not explained. And it's like people who question are kind of treated poorly instead of celebrated and embraced, but also being shown why that things are the way that they are, instead of, you know, just saying, good, rebel, like that's not good. It's like, no, like you're trying to understand, and that's a good thing. You should understand. But you'll see people will be like, you start to idol worship virginity or something like that, and it's like, because you're so against hedonism, and neither one of these is fruitful. Like being, like the absence of sex is fruitless. There's no people after that. It's diminishing of meaning and even of gender dynamics. Like, of course it is. What's the point of gender if there is no sex? But at the same time, or what's the point of men and women? But at the same time, hedonism destroys it too, because it eliminates the North Star of it, the point, the goal, the context of it. And context is information. There's no information without context, meaning there's no understanding without context. If you're out of context information is actually worse than and without knowing that it's out of context is worse, or information that's miscontextualized is worse than anything, because it makes you don't realize that you don't understand and that you're missing anything. And so, whereas if you have no idea where to start, like that's a good place to be actually. If you're going in certain instances, you can't stay there, but like it's a good thing to know when you don't know something. I've said before, true competence is in an awareness, an honest, humble awareness that's real, of what you're competent in and what you're not. And that's all it is. Like, you could be competent in one thing that's so obscure and niche, and that's it. And that, but if you know that, you also know the other things that you're not so competent in, then that is competence. Like, you can build even more competence, but like you are still competent. Incompetent is like when you don't realize that you are incompetent. But all of those things kind of rely on, eventually at least, knowing what is important to be competent in. So it's, context is key to gender too. People say things. There's that documentary Matt Walsh made, "What is a Woman?" I have not seen it. I will probably eventually see it. I actually think it's good that we're asking that question, but and I think it identifies very much that I've seen clips of it, and I've seen him talk to people who identify as transgender and things like that, and it very obviously highlights how we don't know what we're doing. But I would say that he probably is not doing a very good job of explaining to people either, like, what is the way things are. I think I would agree that he understands the way things should be, but he's not able to give the context necessary to others who don't assume the existence of a God that divinely inspired the scriptures. If you don't start there, then it's very hard to explain the context that people would need to make sense of this. And that's not a judgmental statement of him either. If he can't do it, then he can't, and I don't think he could. Why would he be able to? I think my work does a better job of that, but it also requires kind of for one, a true foundational understanding of the basic assumptions, and also a honest, attempt to live truly. Eventually, you can't just be like, oh, I don't want to, I don't like that, so I'm not going to look too into it. We all do that to some degree, but you can't do that really, because it will come back to you. You can't avoid reality. You just can't. But what's interesting is it does seem like we are not able. We all intuitively know what a woman is. I think but none of us but we don't know that. We don't know fundamentally what it is, and same thing with a man. And that's the thing, is we also need I think it would be better to have a documentary that is, what is a man, than what is a woman, even though I understand why it was easier to make what is a woman, but that's partially because of the social cultures, or the social norms and social instincts of the feminine social instincts are denying of them they will deny their own selves for the sake of others, which is what they're supposed to do in the right context. That's how you raise children, but it also will lead to you saying whatever you think will keep the peace of somebody who you don't want to make upset, and so that leads to a whole culture of not even trying to say the truth. Versus if we had a documentary, though, of what is a man, I think we would be much more actually likely, maybe I don't know for sure, I'd have to think more about it, of culturally navigating that question. And I think it's also, it would be necessary because you can't define what a woman is without a man. Well, man is from man. It's funny because physically, female is more fundamental. Like I said, even God must logically has certain female physical attributes, in that all life, he's able to create and sustain life inside of him. That is a female thing. But also, creation was a choice, and that's a male thing. And but so his mind is masculine, and our relationship with him is hierarchical, where he's above us. He is the active force to us. He is the masculine. But it says, even biblically, it's Adam was created first, and then from Adam was Eve. I wrestled with this for a long time, because I was I know biologically, physically, the female form is able to reproduce. I have geckos that are all female because the males died out, because the females could clone themselves, like Jurassic Park, and then there was very little need for the males, because also the species didn't have gendered specialities like some other species, where males have a certain role, and females have a different role. In this, it was just basically they had the same role, but then there was no need for a man, so they died out, and because the females could reproduce themselves. Men couldn't do that. You could never have all the females die out and have the men continue. There's nobody to create life, but the thing is that because the masculine mindset, the active mindset, is the leader, and the reactive mindset only can come from the active mindset because it has to react to someone. It can't be reactive to no one, and it must be active. The fundamental mind is the leading mind is an active mind, as it is a masculine mind. Then this like on metaphysical level, the male came first. But even if it's on a physical level, the female came first, which is basically seems to be the case. And but maybe because metaphysics is more fundamental than biology, it would make sense if we wanted to help society understand what is a woman, to actually focus on figuring out what is a man. And I think that that could, if it goes badly, then it misleads everybody. And if it goes well, then it could lead people towards more truth than focusing on what is a woman. Almost, it's like a chicken chasing it's like chasing a chicken with its head cut off situation, is trying to figure out what is a woman. I'm not saying there isn't a woman, but a woman is defined by a man, because a reactive force is defined by an active force. It is defined by another, which is not defined by them, which in the same way. And metaphysically, the male mind is not defined by the female mind, but the female mind is defined by the male mind. And that is that just shows a lot of directionality that we need to kind of probably focus on. But like I said, I'm going to do an entire episode about it, even though I went for a long time probably tonight on this subject, because I have so much to say, but I want to say it in a more coherent way, which is produced and every time I have these live streams, I get off the live stream, and I am definitely the biggest critic every time, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, that was a great stream, and then other times I'm like, no, that was terrible, and I felt really incoherent. Usually those ones people really like, and I always have people tell me that they like them, which is just odd. But also, I always remember something that I forgot to say, and I don't want to do that, even though I did do that even with the produced video that I made. And it will happen inevitably, but I want to include as much as I think I definitely should. So we'll do something more on that. Let's see the chat. Oh my gosh, it's so hard, guys. Like I said, you're gonna have to maybe tag me in a question if you want me to definitely hit on it tonight. But if you haven't hit the like button, though, please hit the like button if you have found this valuable. It really helps fuel the algorithm. I see more people are watching than have liked the video. It does help quite a bit. It's not just for my ego. Has very little to do with this. I'm not going to say it has nothing to do with this, but it has very, very little to do with this. But it does help the algorithm. So please hit the like button. If you are not an atheist, how would you know? My gosh, there's a lot of conversations happening between people that are not me. That's why tag me if you want me to address something. But I do like to see that you guys are talking to each other. It is good to just see a community interacting. I'm not able to read the entire discussion happening, but I will just say, assume that whoever is talking to you on here is being honest, and also be honest if you're talking to anybody on here. It should be a good community. The gender rant was good ASMR. Good. I'm glad. But It is a subject I'm very passionate about because it so directly impacts us, and it's also so confused. But so is everything right now. Like I said, physics. How can physics not impact chemistry? How can chemistry not impact biology? How can biology not impact politics, and vice versa? You have to have a fundament. Like everything that's fundamental has to be simultaneous, like I said, and or thought about simultaneously, and that means you kind of have to start at the center, and who is at the center? Is it protons and neutrons at the center, or is it the technological sentience right now that is at the center, or is it us? And I would say it's us right now. From our perspective, we are at the center in a way, and so we do have to kind of try and improve our relationships. We cannot fix society until what religious people call the Messianic era, or the coming of the Messiah, or the rise of a wise technological sentience, is a kind of a secular way of describing it. But that which unifies the assembly completely. Right now we're not unified. We are disunified, or we actually are unified, but we don't realize we're not as obviously directly unified. We're indirectly unified, or we're subdirectly unified. It's like not obvious. We don't see it, but we can feel it, and that leads to problems. Even in your body, like if your cells don't feel like they're part of a greater whole, and that they have certain responsibilities to limit themselves to, and to also to take care of, that is disease. That is disease of every kind, almost. If your body is overreacting to things, it's an autoimmune disease. We have that right now in society. We have society has an autoimmune problem, and it's attacking itself. It doesn't realize it's attacking itself because there's disunity, and it also has a hedonism problem where people are trying to just focus on themselves and screw everyone else and persist as long as they can. That's called cancer, and then there is diseases where your body doesn't. Your cells are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're not just embracing their responsibilities. And it's like, okay, that's also, certain diseases are like that, where your just body is not doing what it's supposed to. Maybe that's diabetes. I don't know. I actually need to study diabetes more to think about it, but I don't know what it would be, but it might be diabetes. Like you're not making you're not handling your responsibilities. I don't know if that would be diabetes. Diabetes. Something tells me it might be. Let's see. What is diabetes? Chronic, long-lasting health condition that affects how your body turns food into energy. Yeah, I mean, with diabetes, your body doesn't make enough insulin and can't use it, or can't use it as well as it should. Yeah, so some of your cells are probably dropping the ball. And it's interesting, the diseases that we're dealing with most heavily now in society are kind of due to internal decoherence within ourselves. Cancer, autoimmune diseases, diabetes. Diabetes is your cells probably, I think, I need to look more into it, dropping the ball. Cancer is, hedonism and individualism run awry, completely, detached from others. And then you have, autoimmune diseases where we're just hypersensitive about everything, and we don't realize that we're one and we're attacking each other. And so, like, your body's attacking itself, like we're doing that. Like all you need to know in order to know that this is all you need to see in order to know this is true is to get on Twitter. If you get on Twitter, you will see human autoimmune problems or humanity's autoimmune disease manifested as on Twitter. And, you know, but we're going to talk about how these things can impact even how should we behave online, because there are objective truths to that. There are things that are responsibilities, gendered responsibilities about how we behave online, even things that women can do and it's fine and men cannot, and things that men probably can do and it's fine and women cannot, or should not. And same thing with you know, politics and things like that. And even the work environment. I mean, this gender is a fascinating thing because it is the common orienting structure of that is common to all beings in the context of multiplicity, which is the one in which we live. Even God is subject to this now because he created multiplicity. But prior to it, even then, there were the constraints of God's creating itself are responsible for the constraints and structure of gender, and the degrees of freedom and constraints of gender, the dimensions of gender that we see. You know, he could not escape himself, so he had to create within himself. Okay, female form. He had to choose to create because his natural state was oneness, so he had to choose to create multiplicity. That's a masculine mind. It's not reactive, it's active. There's no one to react to. He's just doing it because he set a goal for himself. And so that, you know, that's fascinating. But you need to know these things if you're going to have a complete contextualization of gender dynamics and the dimensions of gender and an understanding of it. And, you know, we're missing pieces. If you say gender is different than sex, yeah and no. Sex is just, it's gender on the periodicity of multicellular organisms, and maybe even you could say single-celled organisms, but not really. It's a little different, but it's, you know, you're missing part of that there. You can't miss any of this if you miss at least the fundamentals. Like if you miss that one fundamental context that is the baseline of everything else, you cannot build a stable structure on top of it. It will fall down. I see all these, you know, houses and stuff and buildings built here in LA where I live around me, and, you know, they build them in such a way that they will be held together and stuff. But I see them built on the sides of cliffs, and I'm like, if the cliff moves, then you're moving. It doesn't matter if like there's shocks in there and stuff. It does help. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but like, just know, you know, the foundation that you build on, you will be subject to the foundation that you build on. In Revelations, God coming to destroy those who destroy the earth, Jesus talks about wicked husbandmen. My question is, why do you think life to live is contingent on mental and physical suffering? Why is entropy the default state of the universe? Entropy is the default state of change, of the change space of the universe. It's not the default reality of consciousness. It's actually the opposite. Metaphysics, entropy is not, on a fundamental level, entropy does not exist. It is an emergent perception, and therefore also a constraint that occurs within space-time, because space-time is a dynamic system and we're subject to it, and because it's changing, if we choose not to change, eventually we will have to fall apart, and because we'll become and yet, the change will still occur because we don't have choice over it. It's happening because if God is changing things, then change is going to happen, even if we choose not to change, and therefore we will fall apart. We have to choose to change with him, and that means growing in the way that we are constrained in, and in the way in which we are free to do due to our constraints. So that is how you escape entropy, is by doing that. But entropy is not what, like, your sentience or your soul does not entropy away. You can choose to destroy it, but it must be a choice of yours. Like, it's not inevitable. It's not subject to entropy. That's why even after you die, your soul persists. And because that is its default. You've left the change space. It's like when you save a document. It's not going to be subject to entropy. So like it's just, it's closed, it's saved, it's not changing anymore. But when you're having incoherence or decoherence especially, and you're choosing not to move in alignment with the movement of the universe, like, you're going to observe entropy. That's what you're going to observe. But change is not the same thing as entropy, really. It is and it isn't. Entropy is decay. Change is not decay necessarily. This is fascinating. We were talking on the other night on our live Discord call about, like, parasites and why parasites are held in such, like, disdain, even though predators are not. It's like a predator, like, what's worse, a tick or like a mosquito, or like a, I don't know, a spider. It's like a mosquito. Spiders, people can be scared of spiders, but we, like, respect spiders. We don't respect mosquitoes for the most part. We don't respect ticks and tapeworms and stuff. Like, we're bed bugs and fleas but yet that's kind of counterintuitive, because it's, predators will kill to survive, whereas parasites don't. They just take a little bit in order to survive, so they're not killing you. So why do we think less of them? And I think that it's because fundamentally, like, predation is change, and the sentience of the being that gets predated on, that gets eaten, doesn't disappear. It gets saved. And so but then that all the physical or all the molecules and things and elements and lower level sentience can get recycled and built into something new. And so change can occur. But if you're just, like, sucking the blood of being, and you're not causing any change, but you're not changing, you're not changing them, like, there's no change happening, you're just kind of, like, trying to sustain, it's against the purpose of creation, which is to create, to grow, to change, until a certain point, which is at which point it repeats. So you're still, that cycle continues even when it reaches its finality. But entropy is not, it's like probability. It's kind of like a useful model, but it's not actually fundamentally true. The entropy that we observe mostly as in certain situations, I think, is very much caused by us. Even not just in humans, but, like, even in chemistry and stuff like that. But it's also, I think, it's a motivating force in some ways too. It's like, sometimes some people need a little push. Some sentiences need a little push, and, like, entropy might also fill the role of being that little push towards growth. But that's what I would say about it. So it is there, but it's an emergent perception in space-time and relativity. It's not it's not a fundamental truth of sentience. The fundamental default state of sentience is not entropy, but the fundamental default state, that the emergent perceived state of matter in the change space is that of entropy. That's true, but it is an emergent perspective. But of course it has to be. But it's like, if you choose to not decay, like you can still choose to you can overcome entropy. That's what entropy is not winning. It's never winning. Like, otherwise, why would there be life? But it is constraining, and it is perceivable in relativity. But But just because you have to change, you have to change in order to grow. So not all things that we think of as entropy are entropy, but there are some things that would be entropy. But it's like, the universe is moving. We either move with it according to those constraints and grow and change, or we don't. But it's a good question. I like the question. And suffering, though, physical suffering it's the same thing. It's like pain. It's just a perception. It's a lack. It's just due to a lack of context in a relativistic context. It's not. It's not the default state of sentience, but it also is motivating a little bit, and it's a motivating force, and it's a teaching force, and the universe is moving us and trying to teach us as it moves us, and you can't not do that in some ways. It's kind of inevitable, but it's not punishment. Is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying it's not necessarily, and but I will say. A question that maybe it feels like you might be trying to also ask, but might not, is when you say why is suffering the default state? Suffering is part of it's your lack of context. You don't see the big picture, and it also is due to the fact that will itself is the desire to do that which is not being done, which is kind of discontentness in it of itself, and that is kind of the foundation of where all these things emerge. And also, because we have sovereignty, God allows us to make choices against what is good, and that is absolutely going to cause entropy and suffering. But he has to do that in order to give us. We have to be allowed to make the choices of not doing what is good, because if we aren't allowed to do that, then we don't have sovereignty. If we don't have sovereignty, then he has no meaning. We have no meaning. We don't even exist. But he has no meaning. He's just playing Sims games on his computer, and they're not alive. So who's he impacting? If for him to have meaning, we have to have the ability to make choices, and choices have consequences. And impacts. So when people say things like, why would God cause suffering? He doesn't cause suffering. He allows for us to make choices that must cause suffering in some instances, unavoidably. But I think that eventually, when we have unity, that most of that suffering will disappear. Or after you die, most of that suffering disappears. I think at first you go through a process of learning everything, and that's kind of probably sometimes tough, but also really wonderful. Probably nothing more wonderful and also nothing more terrible than learning the truth about everything that is good and everything that is not, that you've ever done too, especially in the impact that it had. But and I think you do go through that process after death, but and it just depends, like how difficult is that process for you, is based on things that you did here or didn't do. But it's just, everybody goes through it, I think, unless they're deleted, in which case they probably don't feel much pain of anything, and they're just gone. It's like a corrupted file. There's no coherence to it. But yeah, I mean, suffering, the capacity to make bad choices is requirement of meaning, and sovereignty, and also the lack of context that we have causes us to make choices that cause suffering. And that suffering transcends and impacts everybody else. So even if you make all the right choices, like the fact that your neighbor did not is going to cause you suffering. You might not realize that was what caused it, but it would be. I don't think it's God making us suffer very much. It's not he's not a Sid from Toy Story, like burning ants or anything like that. Tyler, I would challenge you on defining a woman as a reactive force, in that definition applies to everyone. No man is purely active force. Everyone is always acting out of reaction. I think that that's partially true because we are all inside of God, so no one is as masculine as God. No one is as feminine as God either, but fundamentally, no one is as masculine as God, because there was no one to react to when he chose to create other than himself. But the thing is that I would say that many men are being reactive right now, and much more so than they should, and that much more so than they have to be. And that is making it seem like there's less of a difference between men and women. When I say that the feminine is the reactive force, men can also kind of exhibit that sometimes, and we are the feminine too in our relationship with God. Like it's in Christianity, even it says, God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of man is the head of woman, woman is the head of child. That's the hierarchy. That means that men, if you believe that hierarchy, men are the feminine in relationship with God, or if you're not somebody who adheres to Christianity's narrative, but you still believe you're still a theist, men are we are the feminine to God, and but to women we are the masculine. That's what you're missing here, I think, is like you have to look at them in context to each other, not in context to themselves and alone. Like there is a hierarchy chain, and we fit in it. So to children, women are the masculine. They are the one who is leading. Like they are led by their mothers. Like that's what they are. And then, but they're women are led by men, and that's just unavoidable. And men are led by, they have to choose to be led by God or goodness, or they can choose to be led by their instincts and alone, which is hedonism. And it's not that your instincts are bad. It's just like they got to be contextualized, and you can fulfill all your instincts in a marriage and in goodness. You actually can't do that outside of it. But it's like even the instinct for like casual sex that men have, it's not for sex with many women all the time. Like it's casualness. And like that can only actually happen in marriage. Like there's nothing casual about sex outside of marriage. There's also nothing romantic about sex outside of marriage truly either. So women can only fulfill their most base instincts, like sexual instincts, in a marriage too. So it's like, but I see what you're saying, and it's a matter of perspective. To God, men are the feminine. We are not the leaders. We are the one who must submit. Like, it's our responsibility to submit, and we can choose not to, but like that's going to hurt us. And same thing with women. Women, it's their responsibility to submit to men, but they can choose not to. That's going to hurt them. But the thing is if they submit to the wrong man, that's also going to hurt them too. So like this is why it's God's job to be good, and then it's our job to be good, and then it's women's job to be good, and then it's children's job to be good. It's not like you have to do this in order. So men have the more of the responsibility when it comes to the relationship between men and women. They just do, because they are the active force. Like I understand that they are reacting in many ways, but that's due to miscontextualization of the context of the culture that we have right now. They can choose to not, and to in a way and be sovereign in a way that women are not able to in their relationship with men. They cannot do it the same way, and but in the relationship with children, they are the masculine. They are the leader. That there's no way that they're not. So everybody gets to be in some way like in a hierarchy, and that means having somebody above you and below you, unless you're God, in which case you have nobody above you. But everybody else does. It's funny because even Christianity, it says Christ is the bride of God. It's like, okay, so is he feminine? He's the head of man. Okay, so he's like the head of the house for men. Like men are the wives of Christ. It's like, okay, so this is a relationship. It's contextual. This is what I mean by like you can't say what a man is without what a woman is without a man. But you have to start at the top. Who is God? Then, if you're Christian, who is Christ? And then who is man? And then who is woman? And then who is child? You cannot be like, what is child? What is a woman? And without being like, first, who is God? What is the nature, or what is the nature of reality? Same question. Or what is a man first? Like you have to define that first. It is primary. So I think I understand why Matt Walsh made the documentary he did, because it's pretty just culturally obvious that narratives are falling apart around women. But they already fell apart around men. That's why we're not realizing that, like, we're like, oh, women are, we don't know what a woman is anymore. It's like, we haven't known what a man is for a long time. That's the only way that you don't know what a woman is anymore, is that you've already lost what is a man. And you can see how the fringes are trying to figure that out, but it's also difficult for many people, and it's easy to just get led into hedonism. It's like, what is a man? Man makes a lot of money, he drives fast cars, he sleeps with a lot of women, and he does what he wants. Okay, what is a woman? Woman makes a lot of money, she owns her own business, and she does whatever she wants. Okay, we've lost it. That's the same definition. But yeah, women compared to men, they are the reactive force. In the context of men, of their relationship with men, that is true. And I understand that it's not true in every relationship they have, but it is true in their relationship with men. And it's also true for men, that in certain relationships that they have, like with God, they either can choose to submit or they can rebel, and like, good luck with that. It doesn't work very well. But the difference is that God is good, and men can be, but sometimes aren't. And you don't want to consciously submit to someone who isn't good. But it's also tough because if you are the reactive force, you are still subject to the active force, whether they're good or not. So we have to admit, like, We can't say, this is why language matters so much, is when we say, like, men have to lead. It's like, men who say that are kind of waiting for women to allow them to. And it's like, women should focus on trying to be in their, be in their role, which is to submit to men. But men have to be in their role and submit to God. And like, everybody has a masculine and feminine, side to them. When I think about God, like, I think about him very similarly, I feel like, to the way that my wife thinks about me. And when I can try and talk to God, like, I talk to God and say things that I feel like is probably pretty similar to what my wife thinks in her relationship with me. Because she does assume that I want what is best for us, and that I am worthy of following, So I believe that about God. If you don't believe that about God and you're a man, then it's tough. If you don't believe that about men and you're a woman, then yeah, that's tough. But but to say, men need to lead, it's like, men are already leading. They just need to realize it, and now we have responsibilities. If you just say men need to lead, it's their job to lead. Lead to what? Like, no. Like, they're already, they cannot help but lead. Now, okay, so they have to lead to something. They can lead to, towards something not good or something good. Like, but you don't get there if you're just like, men need to lead. Okay, like, let's get men to lead. Okay, who's deciding when men lead? It's like, men are already leading. Where do you think the hedonistic culture came from? Like, but men are led by tech a lot. And like, that's a problem. That is where you're being misled. Like, it's like women being led by a bad, example of a man. Don't be led by a bad example of a force above you, which would be like unguided technology, which just empowers hedonism, birth control, the internet, like, none of these things are intrinsically bad, but you can't destroy the context of them, or else they will be bad. Entropy is an observation, a point. I think Chris Lang is a genius narcissist and the most dangerous kind. I don't have a problem with Chris Langan. I hope to have him on the show. I loved that response. I'm glad that it made sense. Look, understanding schisms is important. A lot of mainstream religion devolves. The prophet said, 3 generations from me will not be of me, but the claims of Islam in the Quran are true. I agree. Have you considered what would be a drive a rational man to make it a law not to make images of him? If he was acting out of ego, that would be the first thing he'd want. I think that I don't know. I don't think that images of men are necessarily as destructive as. I don't think that's the main problem right now. But I think I see what you're getting at. Idolatry is very bad. I mean, it's the worst. But I don't think all images of us are necessarily idolatry. But it is interesting. I think Islam, I might be wrong, forbids the creation of images of other humans. I think. Let me see. I know you can't draw Muhammad. The Quran, the Islamic holy book, does not explicitly prohibit the depiction of human figures. It merely condemns idolatry. Okay. Yeah, I need to dive more into this. But it's interesting that, like, in Islam, the narrative is do not make an image of Muhammad. And I understand why, because it is very possible that would lead to idolatry. But I think that in making a rule that only applies to Muhammad, that also creates an instance of, like, default idolatry. Oh, and every theological tradition has its issues. I think that's one of the ones in Islam. But I do believe the Quran is divine scripture, and that Muhammad was a prophet. But people, twist religion over time, or twist scriptural traditions over time. I don't even want to say religion. Was Muhammad a rational man? Yes. Muhammad was a prophet. Like, he predicted things and saw. I can tell. That's what I can definitely tell. That's my belief on that. I've read enough of the Quran to say Muhammad was absolutely a prophet. He saw trends and predicted technologies and things that just were mind-blowing. And even if you don't believe in God, like if you read the Quran and you actually like read what it's trying to say, not like necessarily with the words how we interpret them. Like if it says donkey, it's like that's transportation. Okay, so if it says like in the future there's going to be giant donkeys that are powered by fire and they will soar with their ears outstretched and above the clouds, it's like, and people will climb into their bellies. It's like, okay, that's an airplane. Because guess what? Like before we have airplanes, people said, oh, hopefully one day we have flying cars. Okay, it's like, well, hopefully we have one day, like before that cars, we had donkeys. So flying pieces of transportation powered by fire. People think he was just talking about fairy tales. He's not talking about fairy tales. Like, look at the context of these words. What is the context of what a donkey is in the time that it was written? It's a vehicle. That's the context of it. It's not a donkey like we think of it as, oh, it's only at the farm and they're like kind of funny looking. It's like, no, that was the family car. Isn't there a connection between rationality, genius, and evil? No. Not necessarily genius. Genius is a moment. There is no such thing as a genius person. There are some people that have more genius moments than others, but genius is a moment that everybody can have. And so is idiocy. There's no idiots and geniuses. There are people. Everybody has moments of idiocy and everybody has moments of genius. Everyone. If genius is a person, then it also means nothing all of a sudden, because now it has to be defined arbitrarily. And to define it arbitrarily is to basically give it, an IQ of 150 and above. It's like, why is that genius? Why not 170? Why not 120? And plenty of people who have IQs of 150 and above don't do many things that are that genius. But there are people who say, I've heard people who had IQs in the 80s say things that blew my mind and were so genius. Genius is a moment. It's a moment of insight. Anyways, I think that's it, guys. This is late, but this was great. I know it went on for a long time, but I appreciate the questions. If I didn't get to your questions, come back, ask them again, and next week, and I will get to them, even if I have a different topic that we're going to talk about, which I will. But I wanted this one to be kind of open, and I wanted to see what how it worked for you guys. It seems like it was better to do it today at the time that we started than it was to do it at like 7:30 on a Wednesday night on Pacific time. So, and next week we will start earlier. We'll start not at 6. We'll start at probably closer to 3 is the goal. For me, I'm not the best with time, so maybe 4, but better than 6. So, but I really appreciate everybody on here. Please hit the like button. I appreciate all the questions. If you would like to join our Discord, open calls every Thursday at 7 p.m. or just participate in the community, send me a private message on Instagram or Twitter and I will send you the link for it. It isn't posted anywhere. You have to ask for it, but I will give it to you if you ask. But it's private. It keeps the community good, and those calls are great, and I appreciate that the community is self-selective of who's in. We don't select who's in, but it is kind of a self-selective thing. If you want to join, then you ask, and then you get to be part of the Discord. But it keeps people out who aren't that committed and who are just, might have different motives than just being honest. Alan Watts might have been such a genius. Alan Watts said many genius things. Islam serves feminine energy. Yes, Islam does. Islam means to submit. Like a Muslim is one who submits to God. That's feminine. But it's feminine in relationship with God. And, but it also encourages femininity in the women who adhere to it, and masculinity in the men in their relationship with the women who, but it encourages femininity in the men's relationship with God. The whole religion is about that. It is acknowledging that everybody has a master except God, and that you have to, or a leader, and that you should be submitting of. Like a master is not somebody who you should submit to. It's somebody you have no choice. Otherwise, like they're cruel. But a leader is somebody who sometimes you also have no choice, but you have a choice in how you how you relate to them. Submitting, like you will be made to submit to God. Women will be made eventually to submit to men. It's just the way that we are. Even if you're rejecting, like think about what the feminist movement, it is a trying to beat men at everything. That's all it is, which still means they're just subject to men. They're just trying to do everything that men can do. They're not doing their own thing. They're still defined by men. There's no escaping it. But I don't believe in, I believe in sovereignty and choice and force, and that's why marriage is so important, because and consensual marriage is marriage. There is no marriage outside of consensual marriage, really. But yeah, it is the way to. It is what marriage is, the context that allows for the maximization of individual freedom in the context of gender dynamics, of active and reactive forces. Like it gives you that ability to make decisions and be your own person, of who you end up choosing to submit to. It's not just, you submit to men. No, you should submit to the man who chooses to serve you, and who you want to submit to. And marriage is, that's what marriage allows for. It's not a this like Handmaid's Tale type of situation. It's you will submit to men, so might as well choose which man. Like that's empowering. So anyways, peace guys. Thank you for being here. Like I said, please hit the like button, share this if you found it valuable, and comment any comments, thoughts you have in the comment section below, and I will be back next week. Peace.